I finally started watching Desperate Housewives. I've finished season 1 and I've started season 2. I was looking online and I couldn't see any commentary videos about this show at all, which should be a crime because not only was it super famous and had millions of viewers, but it really, I think, inspired a lot of television that followed. I'm going to be doing a deep recap of what happens in the show and my thoughts on it overall. Season 1 built slowly. I was finding it a bit boring and I was like, oh, I hope it picks up. But then about halfway through season 1, the show got so juicy and interesting, and now I'm a few episodes into season 2. I'm just loving it, like genuinely. I'm getting an addiction to this show. Like, it's so bingeable and got really funny towards the end of season 1, and I just love it. I'm really impressed with how much I'm enjoying it so far, and the characters are interesting, and I have some thoughts on why it did so well as a show as well. One of the reasons I think is because of the themes that the show talked about and the way it addressed those themes. Like the title Desperate Housewives basically summarizes what the show is about, which is a bunch of women who are desperate for changes in their lives or seemingly have this perfect life with the white picket fence and the luxury, but behind the scenes they're really struggling with disappointment, secrets. Definitely the show plays a lot on how the aesthetics are really beautiful, but then underneath the surface everything's actually really messy. And the show isn't just about the lives of the women or the lives of the men in the show. It's the wives' interactions with their husbands and the kids have their own lives and insecurities going on that we see explored, and the other neighbors. One of my favorite things about Desperate Housewives is the way that it explores femininity and how every woman is so different. Like, you've got Gabrielle, who's kind of controlled by her husband Carlos, but also talks back to him. Women who really openly express their emotions like Susan, contrasted with ladies like Brie, who really struggle to express how they feel, which typically isn't a very feminine idea in society. But the show follows 4 main women, maybe 5 if you count Edie too. She's in the show's promo marketing stuff a lot, so I guess you could argue she's one of the main women. If you include all 5 of them, you've got Susan, who really struggles with her love life because she has this very messy divorce and she wants to be happy again. Her honesty and expressiveness is what makes her attractive to men. And then you've got Lynette, who's really striving for equality in her marriage, be a stay-at-home mum and a business mum and manage everything, but she ends up wearing herself really thin. But she can be quite manipulative sometimes in order to get what she wants. And then you've got Gabrielle, who also has the capacity to be manipulative, but often she uses her sexuality to get what she wants. Meanwhile, you've got Brie, who wants to be the perfect mum, homemaker, and have the perfect life, and under the surface she has a really complicated relationship with her husband and isn't always the best at parenting her children. And if you count Edie too, she's trying to fit into the neighborhood and be included by these girls, but she's not married, she doesn't have kids, and she's way more, I guess, sexually free than the other girls, and sometimes she feels judged for it. It is a really good show. Overall, I am enjoying it. I don't know if it will get worse or have shakier seasons, but I thought that season 1 was very strong, and it has a very clear mystery aspect from the beginning till the end. And it's so cool. I love that we learn more as we go along, and it's actually interesting and makes sense and is well explained, which is good as well. Being domestic is forced on a lot of the wives, even when it's not actually what they want. For example, Edie is single and childless, and yet she's isolated because of that and not really respected or fully included by the other women. At least with the point of the show I'm up to, it feels that way. And Gabrielle has always been so clear that she doesn't want kids, and I thought it was nice to have one of the main housewives just be childless, but then she's made pregnant by Carlos, and he does that in a very manipulative way by messing with her birth control so she'd get pregnant. However, what I like about the show is it clearly depicts that just because these women are going to have kids or get married, it doesn't guarantee happiness for them. A lot of the men are actually messier than the female characters. Like Carlos, Gabrielle's husband, is really controlling and patronizing towards her. very sexist at points as well. And Lynette's husband has really good intentions, but at this point of the show at least, he doesn't really grasp what it's like from her perspective and how she feels like it's difficult to be a stay-at-home mum. And I'd say Mike is the only stand-up guy in the show that's more well-rounded, but even he is hiding a big secret from Susan. George the pharmacist is a total creep. Lynette's boys are really badly behaved. Susan's ex-husband blatantly cheated on her and doesn't even feel bad about it. That's a nice thing about the show, is that the men are equally or even more messy than the women, but the show doesn't go into man-hating territory, which would also be uncomfortable because the men are still entertaining characters. Often the women as well are complicit in the mistakes that happen in the relationship, or if a marriage breaks down, they play a big part in that, and the show makes it very clear that both parties are to blame and it's not just one person that is the cause for faults in a relationship, which I really appreciate. So even if the show does have some flaws, overall in season 1, it's just really interesting and I've really enjoyed it so far. I'm really excited to see what happens in season 2. Before we get into what happens in the show, let's just talk about the main women and my thoughts on them so far. So we'll start off with Susan Meyer. I've heard a lot about Susan, and apparently she turns out to be one of the worst characters later on in Desperate Housewives, so I'm really scared to see that happen. I don't know when exactly it happens, like if she gets worse over time, because I thought she was absolutely fine in season 1. In fact, I've really liked her character on screen so far. Very emotional, absent-minded, and vulnerable, I'd say, the words I'd use to describe her character. She's also very accident prone and clumsy, which is often used as an opportunity for comedic relief, like she hits her head at the bottom of the sink, or she trips over, or she locks herself out of her own house naked and then falls into the rose bush. She often puts herself into situations where she humiliates herself publicly in order to make a point or something. And she does that a lot, but I could totally see how over time that could become potentially annoying. She's like the archetype of the girl next door, and I'd say that she really is the heart of the show in season 1. However, now I've started season 2, there's definitely been a shift where Bree is moving into position as the main character in the show, because Susan's a bit more on the back burner. Now I'm on season 2, I think I'm about 5 episodes in, and she made this error where she lied to Mike, her boyfriend, about where his son was and was kind of deceptive about it, and then didn't think that he would find out, which obviously he would find out, and it was quite frustrating. So I can already see it happening where maybe she's not going to think stuff through. Her struggles are relatable in season 1 of her trying to get over her ex and move on to be with Mike, and a lot of her storylines in season 1 revolve around her trying to get with Mike, hoping he'll like her, hoping he'll reciprocate the feelings, which is good, but I hope that they do give her more stuff to do, because it would be really annoying if the whole show revolved around her trying to get her relationship with Mike to work, because honestly, even though it was fun in season 1 to see her relationship with Mike begin, I'm really concerned that's all her entire character will be in season 2, because in season 2 she hasn't done much other than basically break up with Mike yet again and then get upset about it, and I'm worried it's going to turn into a cycle, but who knows, we'll have to wait and see. She definitely has an emphasis on relationships as part of her storylines, but I don't mind, because I know it's a stereotypically feminine thing in movies for it to be about their love life, but I don't think that's a reason to underplay it or say it's bad because she wants relationships to work out for her. Maybe people would say that her character should be more about her job or her achievements, but I think it's nice to see a woman who just wants to end up happily married with someone, and that's like a core part of her character, and I don't see anything wrong with that. But at the same time, there is a point where it will get tiresome if every 2 seconds she's just talking about Mike. I barely ever see her working or doing her job, you know? However, one thing I have started to notice in season 1 that could definitely potentially get worse is that she is made out to be very quirky and cute and clumsy, but that could be used as an excuse when she does stuff wrong. She does have this tendency to neglect her daughter, or when she gets depressed to just forget about her daughter, or she'll just share all her personal problems with Julie and ask her for advice. And it's just a very weird parent-child dynamic, because as the adult she should just be able to make her own decisions. So she really needs more female friends. There were a lot of points where she was asking Julie for advice when it would have been so much more appropriate for her to ask one of her older woman friends. Maybe it's just true in season 1 and that's it, but the writers love to find an opportunity to have her be naked or half dressed at any point. She was naked in the bushes and then Mike saw her, and then she was at this fashion runaway event and had her dress ripped off, so she was literally naked there in front of everyone. Or when she's trying to impress Mike, she goes and puts on this lingerie, and all the characters will be dressed up to go to an event, but then when they see Susan, they're all like, oh my god, Susan, you look amazing, and they all stop and stare at her. I don't even really know why, but it's like they're trying to prove to us that she's more attractive or desirable than Edie, because Edie's this blonde bombshell, but it's like they're saying what people really want is more the natural beauty of someone like Susan, the girl next door brunette type. To be fair though, I haven't seen the whole show, so this may change over time. I will say that I love Susan's chemistry with Mike, and I think they're so far the best couple in the series, because it's nice to see their relationship actually evolve from the beginning, so you get some backstory and context about how they met. And I swear all their kiss scenes are great. Maybe it's just overcompensation because she really wants this one to work out, but I felt like Mike was a lot more chill and go with the flow when it came to their relationship. And despite Susan's stupidness at points, I still felt like she was probably my favorite one out of all the girls in season 1. I'm just enjoying it while it lasts. But the next girl I want to talk about is Gabrielle. I'm really excited to see where her character goes. I think she has a lot of potential. She's introduced as the materialistic, self-centered one who is a caring friend but is also quite self-absorbed, and I feel like there's so much they could do with that. She loves her luxurious lifestyle, she loves getting compliments, she loves to feel adored and attractive, and sometimes if she feels like she's not getting enough attention, then she'll look for it elsewhere, which is one of the reasons why she cheats on her husband and has an affair. It's absolutely insane how her having a relationship with an underage boy is just pushed under the rug. It's so bad. He turns 18 at some point, I think towards the end of season 1, but when her relationship with him started, he was about 16 and she's a grown woman. It's like the Arya and Ezra thing from Pretty Little Liars, but worse because she's older than Ezra was. The guy playing John is about 26, so he looks much older than the character is meant to be. But it's insane that she wasn't charged for it. The parents of John had a very underplayed reaction, especially the dad. Her friends were still happy to keep being her friends, so she didn't suffer any real consequences. Her reputation overall is pretty unscarred, which is so stupid because I wanted to see her whole reputation be ruined by something like that, because that's just how it should happen in real life. And so the message is really icky. You can definitely see that it's an old show from like 20 years ago, because I can guarantee that shows nowadays would not be able to get away with doing that because the audience would be so mad. I will say though that I understood in a way why she cheated on her husband, because he's just so unlikable and controlling and creepy, and I just don't like him. If he thought maybe she was having an affair, he'd just go and beat people up without even checking to see if they were responsible or not. Gabrielle's definitely used as one of the main examples in the show of the pressure to be beautiful, feminine beauty standards, and consumerism. Gabrielle asserts her power through her sexuality and her beauty, but in a way it also represses her too. Even in the second season, Gabrielle's really fighting for her right to be involved with financial stuff in her marriage with Carlos, so he's not making the decisions all the time, because in season 1 he started to get really controlling around her bank accounts. Carlos basically assumes that his money is what keeps Gabrielle attracted to him and wanting him, which is partly true. And his identity is so closely tied to his wealth, and when they start having money troubles in season 1, it's not like Gabrielle just ditches him, but it definitely affects affects their relationship in a negative way, and it takes some work for them to say that they'd still be committed to each other despite any money troubles. And Gabrielle genuinely cares about him, but Carlos starts having this big fear in season 1 that she's going to leave him and lose interest when he goes to jail and stuff because of these money troubles they're having. Her having an affair, cheating on her husband, puts him through emotional pain, and it takes her a while to actually feel guilty about it. For a long time she doesn't feel bad at all, so she's by no means perfect, which I also quite like. It's the same reason why in some ways I like Susan being selfish and stuff, because it makes them more interesting characters, and no one wants to watch a show about characters that are completely perfect. The next character I want to talk about is Bree. When I started season 1, I could not stand her. I did not like her at all. I did not enjoy her scenes. I thought she was annoying, and I was like, why is she one of the main characters? I wanted her to get off my screen. She's really rude to her husband in the first few episodes. She publicly humiliates him at a dinner party, and she can be really ruthless and cutthroat when she's upset about something. I didn't like the way she was speaking to her kids. There was more to her than that. Like, she genuinely wanted things to work with her husband, but he wasn't really fully emotionally present as a husband. And also her son starts being really disrespectful towards her and rebellious and downright mean at points, which made me feel really bad for her because she was trying her best in her own way. Now I'm on season 2. I'm actually thoroughly enjoying the scenes with her character. She's definitely worried about getting hurt or taken advantage of, but doesn't realize it, because it's like whenever she's feeling out of control, she just starts cleaning to try and put everything in order. And it's definitely a way for her to disconnect and forget about her feelings if she starts cleaning or distracting herself almost. When Rex starts having a heart attack, rather than immediately calling the police, she starts making the bed. She's actually a very good friend. Like, Gabby was having money troubles in season 1, and Bree was so sweet about it and was basically offering her money and being really caring about it. Lynette's the final woman I want to talk about, and so far she's definitely one of my favorites in the show in terms of characters. I just really like her. She's so cool. She's really driven and a go-getter. She's in touch with what people would consider her masculine side. If she wants something or she's bothered by something, she'll tell you to your face. She's not afraid of confrontation. So she contrasts her husband in a really cool way, because he's an extreme conflict avoider at points, whereas she likes to think that she's right, overly involved in situations and stuff where it actually has nothing to do with her, because if she thinks something's wrong or someone's being mean to someone, she feels the need to step in and be this white knight, and that gets her into some pretty sticky situations. And her husband tells her that she has this tendency to get all obsessive and overly involved. And again, all the wives have weaknesses, all of the women have problems. She had this continual assumption that her husband was going to cheat on her or not be loyal, which was honestly delusional. Tom is definitely more of a passive male, even with the way he communicates. It's a more traditionally feminine way of communicating, whereas she's very blunt and speaks the facts. When she thinks that maybe he might be cheating on her, she doesn't ask in a gentle way. She just kind of puts words in his mouth and assumes he's doing it. And Lynette starts to feel like she's really losing touch with herself in season 1, because she's been a stay-at-home mum for so long and she's got all these really crazy out of control kids to look after. She's definitely the super mum of the show. One of the reasons why she struggles so much as a mum too is because her kids are so crazy, they're hyperactive, they're loud, they can't sit still for 2 seconds, and they definitely have like ADHD. It's a very stereotypical view of people with ADHD, and it's just not accurate. Lynette hired this young, attractive babysitter to look after the boys. She was naked at some point because she threw her clothes in the wash or something, and she was just going to quietly go into the other room, but then she saw Tom there, and he didn't really look away immediately or apologize. He just sort of stared at her and smiled, and it was really creepy. And then he went upstairs and was obviously aroused by the experience, so he tried to initiate sex with his wife, which I thought was really odd. And then Lynette's reaction was weird, because she sensed something was up, and she says she wants to hire a new nanny, but they should be preferably unattractive. And I don't know, that's so weird. Like, you shouldn't punish the women for your husband's bad behavior. But I did start to like Tom more throughout season 1, especially at the end of the show when he said they should maybe reverse roles and he should be a stay-at-home dad and she could go back to work, because he'll end up learning to be more empathetic towards her, and maybe putting himself in her shoes will make him respect more the hard work she does. Edie is the final character I want to talk about. She's like the single fun blonde character who brings a lot of comedic relief. She's also one of the only characters, if not the only character, who will consistently call Susan out on her bullshit every time, which is great because often people just don't really tell Susan off for stuff, and I always appreciated that Edie would say it like it is, and she would give Susan a really hard time and actually punish her when she messed up. She's obviously not a very good person, but the other housewives have issues too, so it's fine and it balances out. I don't really like how much Edie is shunned and ostracized for her mistakes when she doesn't really do anything wrong, but what makes Edie so likable to me is that she doesn't get on her moral high horse and pretend she's so amazing all the time. She knows what her issues are, she knows her faults, she's self-aware, and she doesn't claim to be this amazing person, which is really refreshing because often the women in the show do try to kind of excuse themselves and pretend they haven't done anything wrong when they have. I really hope that throughout the show, Edie will be allowed to continue with her very sex positive lifestyle and won't want to be tied down, because it would be a little bit sad if she ended up chasing the idea of having a husband. It's what makes her different, it's what makes her stand out, to be independent. So I kind of hope they don't take her down the route of having her married again with kids, but we'll just have to see. But now I'm going to recap what happens in the show to each of the women. In the pilot episode, the residents are shaken up by the sudden suicide of their neighbor, Mary Alice Young, and they're really confused as to why she would kill herself because her life seemed to be perfect. We end up, as the series goes on, learning more and more about her very suspicious husband and her disturbed son, Zach, and this whole thing around her wanting to have a kid, and so Zach isn't actually her child, and in fact Zach is the son of Mike, Susan's boyfriend, who Mike never raised, he never knew. We meet Susan and Edie, who are both fighting over the new hot neighbor, Mike. Edie wants to sleep with any hot guy in town, so she doesn't like that Susan's trying to move in on her man, and so she's quite frustratingly trying to get in the way every time Susan tries to talk to Mike. So immediately Edie and Susan are established as not even frenemies, just enemies. Susan accidentally burns Edie's house down because she sneaks over to try and see if Edie is hanging out with Mike there, and then she knocks a candle over without realizing, and she feels too guilty to tell Edie about it, nor does she like Edie, so she doesn't think that Edie would be particularly forgiving about it. While the ladies put away Mary Alice's belongings, they find this blackmail note there. We later learn that a very nosy, nasty neighbor was the one blackmailing Mary Alice, because she found out that Mary Alice's son isn't actually her son, and that she'd killed the mother who was trying to come into the house and take her son back. In the second episode, Bree suggests to Rex that maybe they should do marriage counseling, because Bree's trying really hard to uphold her image as the perfect wife, but because she's so controlling and micromanaging everything Rex does, he feels really unhappy in their marriage and he wants a divorce. And there are multiple episodes of them going back and forth as to whether they should divorce or not, and antagonizing each other. In the fourth episode, Carlos becomes suspicious that his wife Gabrielle is cheating on him, but he ends up suspecting the wrong man rather than the gardener, and because Gabrielle doesn't feel particularly guilty about it, she's continuing to cheat on her husband without his knowledge, but she starts noticing that the gardener John is actually forming feelings for her, and it's not just like hooking up. In the eighth episode, the dead woman's husband Paul mercilessly kills the nosy neighbor Martha Huber because he realizes that Martha was actually involved in the cause of his wife's suicide, and he's so angry about it he decides to kill her. In the next episode, Bree and Rex are trying to figure out how to parent their son Andrew because he just has no remorse for multiple bad things that he's done, and they find marijuana in his room. Paul, the disturbed neighbor whose wife's died, has his son sent away to a mental institution, but then he finds out that his son has disappeared, and Zach's actually now staying in Julie's room. Julie's the daughter of Susan, and Zach feels like he can trust Julie to look after him and not say anything since they're both kids, and so without her mum's knowledge, Julie has him hidden there, and they start to form this bond and even this young kind of romance. And Paul's really mad because he doesn't know where his son is and he's out looking for him, but Zach doesn't feel comfortable going back to his dad's house. Zach at this point is a character you do sympathize with and root for. However, Susan, the mum, ends up finding out, and she obviously obviously can't have this boy staying in her house. Susan's never been responsible in her life. She's always letting Julie do her own thing, and she never plays the parent card. But then when she feels like it, she decides to be responsible and send Zach back to his father. And it really annoys Julie because she feels like Zach's father, Paul, isn't actually safe to be around. Clearly he isn't, because we saw him murdering a woman ourselves. Bree at this point has been a very unlikable character because of her controlling attitude and just in general what a weird woman she is. But we end up feeling pretty bad for her because Rex, her husband, cheats on her because he couldn't be bothered to communicate his issues in the bedroom with her. And also it's partly due to the fact that she is so judgy and conservative that he feels like if he shared something, she would jump down his throat and be really mean about it, which she kind of was. So he'd been cheating on her, and it's really embarrassing because the woman that he cheated on her with has been doing this with basically a lot of men in the area, and they'll pay her to do it, and it's like her part-time job. Bree is really worried that everyone will find out that Rex was one of her clients, and Bree's public image is really important to her. Meanwhile, Gabrielle, who's always been pretty materialistic, starts to get really stressed because she's actually having money troubles, and she thinks that she might actually need to get a job again for the first time in ages. And this makes Carlos really insecure because he feels like maybe she won't want him anymore, because a big part of his appeal as a husband was the fact that he could provide for her financially. Eventually, when she feels really pressurized, Susan ends up confessing to Edie that she actually burned her house down. And this is a pretty awkward confession to make because she just started bonding with Edie. Martha Huber's body was found, and as a result, Edie was really upset because she doesn't have many female friends in the area, but she was close to Martha. And Susan tries to comfort her, but as a result, Edie thinks that maybe Susan's intentions are pure and they could actually have a friendship. And she starts to actually bond with Susan despite their female rivalry and bitchiness competing over Mike. But then Susan kind of ruins it by saying, hey, I burnt your house down. They go back and forth a lot throughout the show, especially when it involves competing over guys. That's when they often get really shaky. Rex and Bree's marriage is going really badly and they're always fighting. So after a while, they just take a break, and Bree starts casually dating this pharmacist called George, who's actually really predatory. George keeps trying to make a move on her or kiss her, but Bree's a bit hesitant because I think subconsciously she's really uncomfortable around him. George is super into her, and so he actually makes a plan that he's somehow going to have her leave her husband or have her husband die or something so he can be with her. The entire time it's basically just Lynette struggling with her kids not being invited to birthday parties because they're so badly behaved, her kids not being let into daycare because they're so disruptive, and she can't catch a break as well because no other mum wants to look after her kids or babysit them for her, and even getting a babysitter who can handle them is difficult. And then the one good babysitter she gets, she ends up firing because she thought the babysitter was too attractive for her husband, and the whole thing's a mess. Mike is the mysterious hot guy who's arrived in the neighborhood, and we don't know much about him except that Susan has a huge crush on him, but we know he has a secret and is being hired to investigate stuff, but we don't really know why. He ends up meeting with his employer, Noah Taylor, who wants him to find Deirdre, who's been missing for more than 10 years. And we don't know at this point that Mike and Deirdre had this association. We don't know that. We just think that she's this random woman that Mike's looking for. Meanwhile, the gardener John's parents end up finding out about his relationship with Gabrielle, and they're obviously really mad because she's this much older woman and it's illegal. The mum's really angry and the dad is just really weirdly forgiving and chill about the whole thing. Mike and Susan start developing this genuinely adorable relationship, and they have such great chemistry. Like I said, they just have such cute, very realistic interactions, and she knows he's doing some dodgy stuff, but she doesn't know why, and it makes her really suspicious. And then she ends up finding out about his criminal record, and she gets really angry, and it's kind of stupid because he gives her a letter trying to explain why he did what he did, and she doesn't want to read it, and she just keeps yelling at him rather than letting him explain himself. It's really dumb because she allowed herself to treat him badly and spiral, but it all could have been so much more solvable if she just heard him out and let him explain. And I really don't like how she was just jumping to conclusions about who he was rather than just asking him. Although Zach's gone back to his dad, he and Julie are still having this friendship / relationship. And as a mum, Susan is really bothered to see her young 14-year-old daughter hanging out with this weird kid. But luckily, even though Julie's secretly seeing him, she ends up being mature enough to make the decision to create some distance for herself, because they're at a pool party and he's making some sadistic, just weird comments about some boys, and it's just unnecessarily reactive and it makes Julie a bit uncomfortable. So she decides to call it quits on their little relationship, but Zach ends up taking it really badly and becoming extremely obsessive with her. And Susan as a mum notices this, and obviously she is protective of her daughter, and she finds Zach just very disturbed, and at multiple points she has to say to him to stay away from her daughter. We know that he's had a hard time. His dad's not very nice and his dad treats him really badly, but Zach is quite unsafe to be around Julie, and that does make him more unlikable, and he gets really angry and has some big outbursts. Bree ends up struggling a lot in terms of her relationship with her son Andrew because he admits that he thinks he might be gay. The dad takes it better, but Bree handles it really badly, and she thinks it's sinful and he won't go to heaven and it's weird. And this makes Andrew really angry because she keeps trying to intervene to convince him that he's not gay, and so he ends up sharing that he has some very sadistic ideas to emotionally manipulate and destroy his mother's life. Meanwhile, Lynette starts getting really jealous because an ex-girlfriend of Tom's starts working with him and has been for a while, but Tom didn't tell her because he knew that she'd be angry and flip out. And the reason why Lynette's so bothered is because it's not just an ex-girlfriend, but it's actually the girl that Tom was with when he cheated on her to be with Lynette for the first time. Tom was with someone else when he met Lynette, which explains why now she's so paranoid about him repeating the pattern and cheating. And he ends up sharing that he feels like she's pushing him further away with her insecurities and stupid, petty high school behavior. Like, she invites the woman around for dinner with just the three of them to try and prove a point that she and Tom are so happy together. And it makes it worse too by the fact that the woman does seem to be trying to take Tom back. George the pharmacist still has this obsession with Bree and he wants to get with her. She and Rex were going to give things a go again, and she just wanted to be friends with George, but George is really pissed off about this, so he starts tampering with the heart medication of Rex. Rex is starting to get sick and he doesn't know why. We also have this new character introduced called Felicia, but she comes into the neighborhood because it's her sister Martha Huber that's murdered. She's such a funny character. The facial expressions this woman does are so funny. I don't know what it is about her. She just cracks me up. Like, she's so awkward every time she comes on screen and so obviously dodgy. When Rex and Bree are in the middle of a fight, Rex has a heart attack and he actually ends up dying, and it's really sad because he dies thinking Bree was poisoning him because he learns that his medication was being tampered with or something. He writes a letter saying that he forgives her despite what she's done before he dies. In the final episode, we get a series of flashbacks revealing what happened to Mary Alice and why she chose to kill herself, which wraps it up really well. Tom finds out through his boss that Lynette tried to get him fired and also not get a promotion because she thought he'd be traveling too much, and it really pisses Tom off because obviously he wants to work. He'd always wanted to get a promotion, and so he ends up saying that he quits and that he wants to reverse the roles. He wants to be a stay-at-home dad. He wants a break from the whole thing, which I think will be so interesting for season 2. Mike kidnaps Paul and brings him to this desert area and tries to interrogate him about what happened to Deirdre, but Mike doesn't end up actually killing Paul and he lets him go. We also have this new family move-in called the Applewhites, which is interesting because they're an all-black family, and I do wonder if the show realized they weren't particularly inclusive right from the get-go, so they quickly rushed to bring in some characters so they could tick the diversity box and be like, look, we did something. But I don't want to assume anything yet. I want to gather some more information, but I'm extremely concerned, to say the very least. Normally I get bored when I'm binge watching stuff for reviews, but watching Desperate Housewives has been an absolute pleasure. I've been watching it day and night when I'm cooking. It's just always playing in the background and I'm thoroughly enjoying myself. But the mystery aspect of this season was definitely lacking compared to the first season's mystery, which was a lot more intricate and interesting, surrounding the neighbor who ended her own life. I'm just going to give you a quick summary about the problematic aspect of this season, and then we're going to get into an overall recap, going into all the nitty-gritty details. It did get a little bit ridiculous at points, especially when I compare it to season 1. It's a bit crazy. There was this whole insurance scam of Susan marrying her ex-husband Carl so she can get an operation done, which was a bit far-fetched. I noticed Susan's storylines being much weaker this season, especially because it seems like they didn't know what to do with her, so they had her dating her doctor and then going looking for her dad, and she's basically running around in circles. Bree becomes an alcoholic quite abruptly softly, and often it's done in a comedic way, but I don't think they handled it with as much sensitivity as they should have. I've heard that Brie and Gabby go through the most character development throughout the show, so I'm looking forward to seeing that happen if it does. But currently on season 2, there hasn't really been that much changing with any of the girls except for Brie. Susan and Lynette aren't really making any progress this season, especially Susan. They're not particularly growing or learning anything, and they don't seem that different from last season. With Lynette, for example, she had a lot of paranoia about her husband Tom cheating on her in season 1, and then in season 2 she's doing the exact same things, jumping to conclusions and assuming the worst of him rather than just talking to him. And it creates a lot of issues and drama that could have been easily resolved if she just listened to him and had a mature conversation. Brie is definitely the only one this season who actually learned from her past mistakes and changed for the better or for the worse, but you know, had some sort of fundamental shift in her character. It's boring if it's stagnant, and I want to see them go through the ups and downs, but Brie's actress definitely had the most to work with in season 2. Another thing I noticed that I hadn't really processed as much in season 1, but that was definitely obvious to me in season 2, is that the girls' friendships with each other is really complicated, because it's really strong in some aspects, like when they're going through a crisis, they're always there to lean on each other and support each other, but in other ways, the concept of female friendship in the show is very shaky. There are some moments of genuine friendship, like in season 1, Gabrielle was having money struggles and Brie chipped in to help her, but at other points, it's like the girls are just meeting up and hanging out, but not actually really connected to each other. And they say that they're friends, but they're always chatting and leaning out the windows to say hi and doing all those things they should be doing. And obviously talking is at the heart of how women particularly relate to each other, because we love to have those emotional heart-to-heart conversations, because that's how we've been socialized for the most part. But what I always find odd about these women is that they could be going through these huge struggles or interpersonal crises and they don't tell each other about it. So it's like it's just happening in a vacuum for each of them, which is odd, because normally women do have those very personal, intimate conversations as a way of bonding and connecting to each other. Their friendship sometimes more seems like a way to pass the time. It's not always rooted in like a genuine love for each other, but it's really odd because at other points they go out of their way to support each other. I've just started season 3, and in season 3 the girls are really concerned about a man Brie's going to marry, and they're not afraid to tell her the stone cold truth about what they think, because they care about her and they don't want her to be in danger. In some ways the friendships are really convincing, and in other ways they're not. The show definitely though has an idea of keep your enemies closer, especially when it comes to Edie. In season 1, Susan only started bonding with Edie and getting closer to her because she felt guilty for burning Edie's house down, but it was nothing to do with her actually respecting Edie as a human and liking her. There are a lot of cliques in the show and exclusivity, almost as if the women are in high school even though they're adults, and Edie doesn't feel a part of that group or like they'd even want to include her. So she basically has to blackmail Susan into Susan letting her come round to play cards with them and spend time with them. And Edie makes a comment that if they were in high school, her and Susan definitely wouldn't have been friends because she was the weird outcast who everyone hated, and Susan would have been one of the preppy cheerleader types who would have completely ignored her. And that got me thinking about whether the show would be considered feminist or not. And honestly, yes and no. I think that it's really cool to show female characters who are struggling with losing their independence and identity after having kids, because that's normal. And some of them also embrace their housewife role and they like being a homemaker, and it doesn't mean you're less of a woman because that's the path you've taken. In fact, it makes perfect sense to me. Overall, I'd say that the show does actually address a lot of feminist issues. Lynette is like the stereotypical mum who's overwhelmed and feels out of her depth, and Brie's like that traditional 1950s housewife who's excellent with baking and sewing and all those very traditionally feminine things. Susan's desperate for love and she basically can't function without a man, and all of those are stereotypes. But The show does go into some depth with critiquing staff and making the women interesting characters that you want to root for. Lynette doesn't just want to be a mum because she has multiple identities and she still wants to work and be driven and have her own career. And as for Susan, she wasn't afraid to pursue Mike and go after what she wanted, or pursue Ron in season 2 when she started fancying him. It's not like the show's saying you have to be a housewife because that's the goal for every woman and you're not complete if you don't have it. It doesn't say that at all, because a lot of the women actually struggle with having kids or being a housewife, or their life is worse as a result. Like Brie, sure, is living out maybe some women's fantasies of having the perfect house and garden, but she has a totally destroyed relationship with her kids and they resent her and they really hate her this season in particular. It got way worse to the point that she almost has a nervous breakdown, which shows that sometimes being a housewife isn't all it's cracked up to be. And Lynette is just totally overworked. And the same goes for their marriages. Like Susan is really giving up hope at points that she's going to find the guy she wants. And as for Brie, she dates George, he turns out to be a stalker, her husband Rex dies, and that whole relationship was just really not what she thought it would be or hoped it would be. So I love that the show doesn't just make out that being a housewife is the goal and the only way to be happy. And it is empowering in a lot of ways because we have a woman doing the voiceover narrations throughout the whole show, and it's cool to have a woman speaking for so much of it. There is definitely a big stereotype in society that women spend a lot of time talking and gossiping and bitching about stupid stuff that doesn't matter because they have nothing better to do. So it is really funny that Mary Alice is like the omniscient narrator, because she spends so much time from beyond the grave gossiping about them, giving updates. So it embraces the stereotype, but in quite a funny way. She knows the answers to the show's mysteries, but rather than giving the answers, she just spends the whole time gossiping about what her friends are up to, which I find really funny. Even though it's not perfect, I'm really enjoying it, and I feel like it has way less plot holes and inconsistencies than shows like Pretty Little Liars, where it truly is all over the place and they'll leave these massive questions unanswered for seasons on end. And Desperate Housewives is definitely way better at wrapping stuff up, which I really appreciate, especially after being such a fan of Pretty Little Liars for so long and then feeling really messed around, not having my questions answered, and it's really annoying. So I appreciate at least that for the most part Desperate Housewives does answer the questions. But even though I've given obviously a lot of positive feedback about this show, I have to say that my biggest issue with season 2 that really drags it down for me is the Applewhite family. One of the big criticisms people had about Desperate Housewives when it first came out was the lack of diversity. They realized they needed a black family because they didn't have one. So we've got Betty Applewhite. She moves into the street on Wisteria Lane with her 2 sons. And I have to say that as much as I loved season 2, whenever I was uncomfortable at any point, it was always some kind of scene involving Betty and her sons. The writers did a really bad job of fitting in Betty's storylines with the other women in the show and having them linked together. And it's especially evident when you realize that Betty was never really incorporated into the main clique with the other women. It felt as if Betty and her sons were on a completely different show, separated from anything that the main characters were doing. They hardly interact with anyone else in the lane, and you could definitely not call them friends. This mystery with the Applewhite family was meant to be some sort of substitute for the Mary Alice mystery in season 1. Betty has a lot of struggles with her sons, especially one of them who she's got locked up in the basement because he's, in her mind, dangerous, but also she wants to protect him. And if we were meant to care about that and how emotional this makes her, we don't, because she doesn't have an emotional connection to any of the other women, nor would any of them realize this was going on behind the scenes, so they couldn't exactly help her with it. At the end of season 2, the mystery's wrapped up and Betty just grabs her son, disappeared. There was no closure. It was extremely abrupt. And why wouldn't you keep them in the rest of the show? Why would you just make them appear in season 2 and then kick them out again? It just seems like such a token diversity gesture. What are they doing? Betty Applewhite keeps her son Caleb locked up in chains in the basement with the door locked. So she's meant to be motherly and caring in her own way through her being controlling and emotionally abusive. None of it made sense. She's saying, I'm caring and my son needs mental help, so I'm going to lock him up because I can't bear to lose him. But the minute things aren't working out, I'm more than happy to poison him. So she clearly doesn't care about him. She's very scheming and secretive and honestly nasty compared to the other women on the show, and it really stands out. Of course they have flaws, like Brie was really against her son being gay and stuff like that, so the women have their problems. Betty is definitely like the most hardcore and cold, and her son Caleb, who she keeps locked up, has this thing where he targets non-black women like Gabrielle, Brie, Melanie Foster, and that's obviously a hugely negative stereotype, again, about black guys pursuing white women in an aggressive, creepy way. And the other son, Matthew, I thought we had some hope with, and I was pleased about that because he seemed sweet and nice and caring and just like he wanted to move on with his life and actually get a job. His mum is very controlling towards him. She doesn't want him to have any freedom because she wants him to basically look after his brother full time, which is ruining Matthew's life. And as a result, I found him a very easy character to connect to. But then they go and screw over his character too by making him basically the main antagonist of season 2 and a liar because he was happy to throw his own brother Caleb under the bus for something he didn't do. He turns really violent towards the end of the show, and the fact that he was actually the guy who killed Melanie Foster and not his brother Caleb is so messed up. It doesn't make sense to me too that Matthew would kill Melanie in order to protect his family, to then being happy to run away with Danielle and murder her mother Brie in cold blood. Why would he be so desperate to run away with Danielle? Is she really that important and amazing? We never got any time spent on Matthew and Danielle's relationship, so it's not very believable that he would risk it all and be happy to kill her mother in order for them to be together. So his character's entirely ruined at the end because he's there pointing a gun at Brie, so he's aggressive. I don't know why he couldn't have just been a nice guy and ended up with Danielle at the end of the show like a normal couple would. And you realize how bad it is because there's this one scene where he's there making out with Danielle and then they hear Brie come in, so he hides under the bed, and then Brie realizes he's under the bed because she sees his hand, and then she turns to Danielle and says, why is there a black man in your room? You wouldn't point to him being black. What has that got to do with anything? As if him being black makes him threatening in some way or suspicious. The worst part is that at the end of the show, when Matthew's holding Brie at gunpoint, the police arrive because for some reason his mum calls the police on him, which would she really do that? The police will probably not be gentle with Matthew. It could escalate badly and he could get hurt, but fine, she calls the police on him and he ends up getting shot in the chest by one of the officers and dies. That's so wrong. That scene actually made me feel sick because characters don't die that often in the show, and he didn't need to die like that. You totally could have kept him in the show rather than killing him after one season, and I just feel like that's really messed up to have him be shot by police. There have been other potential killers in the show that were about to go and hurt someone, and before they did it they were reasoned with or told to put the knife down or put the gun down, but the fact that he wasn't reasoned with and was just killed immediately is very suspicious to me. It's a shame because the idea for the Applewhite storyline is great. This suspicious family moving in, a dangerous son who needs to be kept away from society. If they wanted to do that, fine. I think they could have done it well. Don't cast the only black family in the show to fill those roles. Like, you can have a black family move in, but don't demonize all of them. That was for sure my biggest issue with season 2. It could have been handled and written way better, and it's a real shame because, like I said, the concept is really juicy and interesting. The whole family was done dirty. Having them just kicked out at the end of the season leaves a very sour taste in my mouth. They should have stuck around. They were brought in to be part of the main cast, so at least one of them should have stayed on. I've had my rant about that, but now I want to do a recap of what happens throughout season 2 and what I thought of the characters, which girl's my favorite and stuff like that. Let's start from the beginning. At At the end of the previous season, Rex, Bree's husband, died because his medication was being tampered with by George. George is a pharmacist who has a big crush on Bree and wants to be with her, so he thought he needed to get her husband out the way. So Bree is really shaken up by Rex's death in season 2 and by the fact that she's now been widowed pretty young. She sets everything up for a decent funeral, and then Rex's mother-in-law arrives called Phyllis, and she's just a total attention seeker, and she's making the whole thing about her. Even though Bree lost her husband, it's not just Phyllis that lost her son, but she's a total drama queen. Carlos is back in prison and he finds out for sure that Gabrielle cheated on him with the gardener, so that affects their relationship for a while because Gabrielle doesn't seem that guilty about it at first. Susan and Mike live through Zach's hostage situation because Zach was keeping them at gunpoint, intending to kill Mike because he knew that Mike had kidnapped his father Paul and held him hostage, so he thought he'd go and attack them. And Zach was slowly unraveling throughout season 1 anyway, and his mental state was not good. The whole reason Mike had even kidnapped his dad Paul earlier in the show was because he knew that Paul or his wife had killed Deidre, who was, I hope I'm saying her name right, who was actually Mike's girlfriend for a while. And the father of Deidre wanted answers about what was going on. Paul told him that he was actually Zach's biological father, and Mike ended up letting Paul go and not killing him. After Zach's little hostage situation, he actually escapes and no one knows where he's gone. Meanwhile, Susan finds out that her ex-husband Carl is dating Edie, and Susan is really upset by this because she feels like Edie's moving in on her life or something. Meanwhile, Lynette, the mum of 4, decides to go back to work, which means that she's leaving Tom with the kids as a stay-at-home dad. Susan, although she's rattled by Zach holding her hostage at gunpoint and she doesn't like how Zach treated her daughter Julie, she loves Mike, and Zach's Mike's biological son, so obviously if she has any chance of dating Mike, she needs to get along with his biological son, and for sure Mike would want to bond with Zach and get to know him. She realizes that she would actually like to find Zach and know where he is. The next day she returns to the park and finds Zach lying on a bench there because he'd hurt his leg, and Susan actually manages to talk to him. She thinks of her daughter and how Zach was kind of creepy towards Julie and getting obsessed with her, and Susan realizes she actually doesn't want Zach there in her life at all, so she tells him to go to Utah and she gives him some money. She lets him go, and then she doesn't tell Mike about what she did. But later on, Mike actually ends up finding out about this, and he's obviously furious that she got involved and he dumps her. I'd say this is like their first proper breakup in the show. Zach searches for his father in Utah for a few weeks, but he eventually returns home and actually sees his father who'd moved back home. Zach then asks his father if he knows who his biological father is, which is obviously Mike the plumber who lives next door, but Paul pretends he doesn't know who the real father is. Days later, Paul goes to knock on Mike's door and he tells him that Zach has arrived home safe and sound, but he doesn't want Mike to be involved in Zach's life or trying to be a father to him, and it would be safer if Mike just stayed out of it. Meanwhile, Bree has started dating George. George is determined to actually get her and swoop in, especially now she's vulnerable after her husband's death. They check into a hotel together in season 2 as well, and she worries about people judging. Bree is clearly still performing a role for society and trying to be like the perfect woman, in the same way that Gabrielle symbolizes the stereotypes around beautiful women being vain and materialistic. Bree keeps trying to get intimate with George, but every time she does, she keeps getting these rashes, almost like she's subconsciously trying to stop herself from being with him, and she doesn't listen properly to these signs, unfortunately. Maybe if she trusted her intuition, stuff would have been better. But she asks George in the hotel if he can be a bit more patient with her because she's just not ready to sleep with him yet, and she's still getting over her ex-husband Rex because he died very recently. But George totally manipulates her and coerces her into having sex with him, which is really messed up. He's not understanding at all. He basically says he's been waiting his whole life for her and he doesn't think he can wait anymore, and giving her an ultimatum like, if you don't sleep with me over the next few days, I'm going to lose interest. And so Bree almost feels pressurized to please him, and the whole thing just made me feel sick. I just don't like that, and there are so many, especially guys out there, but girls too, who are really pressurizing when their partner isn't ready to have sex yet, or they feel entitled almost to that person's body, as if you should just do it on my timeline, and it's just not right. I loved the Brie and George storyline, and I thought it was one of the best parts of season 2, but I really don't like how quickly she rushed into this relationship with George, considering her husband had just died in the finale of the last episode, especially because Brie has a lot of societal ways that she does stuff and routines. Even after Rex died, she wanted to call the girls and tell them, and any normal person would just call them, but she thought, no, I can't call them. I'll wait till 9 o'clock the next morning and then call them on the dot, because that seems more appropriate. She does everything according to like what she thinks she should do, so I seriously doubt that she would be so hasty to start dating George, because she'd be like, what would the neighbors think, or whatever. It's just a little weird. Also, beforehand, she was never particularly interested in George and didn't really have those romantic feelings for him. The George storyline should have happened later in season 2. I think what they should have done is had her husband die at the end of season 1, and then they should have opened season 2 with her alcoholism storyline, so maybe she could have slipped into alcohol immediately because of her husband dying as a coping mechanism, which would have made more sense for it to be more immediate. And then she starts recovering from alcohol and then starts pursuing George, or using him as a distraction from the alcohol, and that would have made more sense if they swapped it around, rather than her dating George immediately and then falling into an alcohol problem. Him trying to get her to love him got really intense towards the end, and that's the sort of thing they totally could have saved for the season 2 finale. She was very easily pressurized into having sex with him, into getting engaged to him, and I know Brie can be a bit of a pushover, but that was just a little bit unbelievable to me that she would be so easily coerced by him. And also, he's not like the most smooth operator, by the way. He's pretty obviously dodgy, and I think it's odd that she couldn't see that because everyone else could. And also, again, I struggle to believe it. George is like known as the local loser. At his engagement shower with Brie, a lot of people were shocked that he could even land a woman. Knowing Brie and how important it is to her what other people think of her, I just doubt that she would be so happy to date this guy. I could just imagine her wanting some rich, successful husband, well up in society that people admire. George starts getting really possessive towards Brie, and he starts hurting people that are close to her or people that might be threats to their relationship in any way, even if it's just her psychologist. He doesn't care. He wants to get rid of them. And then an ex-girlfriend of his visits Brie and tells her that George is dangerous and was really possessive when they were together, that he'd torched her car, that he'd stalked her, that he'd slapped her. And Brie doesn't believe her at the time, but after a while she starts to rethink it. She does this experiment where she tries to push George to see how he reacts when he's triggered, and he reacts really badly. He's not happy to let it go and he keeps pursuing her. There's a really funny scene where Brie's dinner party is interrupted by George trying to sing to her from outside and blasting music in the stereo. He was singing "Don't Give Up on Us." So she grabs her gun and goes up to the top floor and shoots down his speakers. She visits her doctor in the hospital, and then she learns that for sure George attacked her doctor and pushed him off a bridge, and this freaks Brie out, so she calls the police on George, and he realizes that he's going to be caught. So a few days later he calls her from a hotel room and says that he's overdosed on a bunch of pills, and if she cares about him at all, then she should come and save him. So Brie does go up to his hotel room, and she's going to call an ambulance because he's taken too many pills, and she's fully intending to, but she says she just needs to know whether he killed her husband and whether it was intentional or not. And George shows no remorse and says that whatever he did for her, and she probably secretly wanted him to anyway. So she actually doesn't call the ambulance and she just leaves him there to die and then quietly leaves. And I don't blame her, to be honest. I mean, he literally killed her husband. But the mistake she makes is that she confides this to her son Andrew, and he's looking for reasons to dislike her, especially because she was not accepting of him being gay in season 1. So her telling him this is obviously really bad. The show starts to address what happens when mums decide to return to work, because like I said, Lynette wants to get back into the workplace. Well, she doesn't want to, she's kind of forced to by her husband because he doesn't want to work anymore and he thinks that they should swap roles. She has a very unsympathetic boss, a female one, who's really inconsiderate of the fact that Lynette has kids at home that she needs to get back to. Her boss Nina Tina definitely represents what women have to give up if they want to go into a male-dominated career field. But it's weird because everyone in season 1 was saying what a powerhouse Lynette was at her job before she had kids and how competent she was. But honestly, she doesn't seem that competent at her job in season 2. She makes a lot of mistakes and often breaks that professionalism barrier. And also she complains a lot about how hard her life is. And I didn't mind in season 1 because honestly, I just felt bad for the woman and she had too many kids. But in season 2, she's got the opportunity to at least spend some time away from the kids and work, but she's complaining just as much. I'm not saying you can't complain or have a good whinge every now and then, but she's just a very negative person, and I hope that she starts to be a bit less resentful and a bit more grateful for what she does have. Gabrielle decides that she's actually going to get pregnant. I thought it was cool that she was the only housewife on the show who didn't want to have kids and was happy to stay independent in that sense, but she knows it's what Carlos wants, so she gets pregnant. She ends up actually having a miscarriage because she falls down the stairs. Caleb escaped from the basement and he was just roaming around the street, and Betty and Matthew had discovered that Caleb escaped. And the funniest thing is I thought he would have gotten a bus and left, but he didn't want to go too far from home because he doesn't know the neighborhood. So he was just sneaking around people's houses and rummaging in their fridge for ice cream. Bless him. So he ended up in Gabrielle's house. He scared her. She fell down the stairs and she had a miscarriage. Caleb's still missing, so everyone's looking for him, and the neighborhood knows him as the local intruder, so they have him arrested by the police. And Betty and Matthew make a decision that they need to go and save Caleb. Carlos has been released from jail because he'd committed some crimes, so he's paying his dues and he's trying to be a better man. So he starts getting more into religious stuff and he starts bonding with this nun called Sister Mary. Gabrielle's a little suspicious because it seems like Sister Mary's trying to seduce Carlos, and he's a bit oblivious to it because he was like, she's a nun, why would she do that? But there's this rivalry between Gabrielle and the nun that happens for a while where they're kind of competing over Carlos's affection, which was very entertaining. Andrew's behavior is just getting worse and worse because he's still resentful against his mum Bree and still feels like she's the root of a lot of problems, including his father's death and her not being accepting of him being gay. So he invites his boyfriend Justin to spend the night and makes sure that Bree walks in on them the next morning. Meanwhile, Matthew and Betty manage to get into the hospital where Caleb's being kept, but there was another person there in the hospital looking for Caleb who's also disguised as a hospital employee, and they follow Caleb and Matthew out to see where Caleb's being taken. A while later, Susan's trying to brainstorm ways for Mike and Zach to get together and bond as father and son because she feels really guilty for sending Zach off to Utah, and she knows her and Mike have been broken up for a while and she's grieving that, but she just at least wants to feel like she's remedied it. So she arranges for them to go bowling with Julie and uses it as an opportunity for Mike to hang out with his son. But unfortunately, Paul finds out about the bowling and he gets really angry, so he goes over to threaten Mike and it escalates into a physical confrontation. That guy who was following the Applewhites turns up at their house where he saw Caleb being taken, and he goes in to try and remove Caleb from the house, and Caleb doesn't want to go, and then the guy falls through this gap in the stairs and dies. He was actually a hitman who was hired by the family of Melanie Foster to kill Caleb because the family of Melanie Foster thought that Caleb had killed Melanie and they wanted some revenge. They dispose of his body in his car, but Matthew left the keys in the trunk, so they're forced to leave the car on the street for a while until they figure out what to do. While the body's in the car, Mike and Paul are obviously fighting on the street. Susan sees them fighting and she gets distracted and crashes her car. She crashes into the guy, the hitman's car, and so the boot opens. They see the dead body in the car and they all start to freak out and wonder who the murderer is. The storyline with Paul affects the Applewhite story and they collide, right? Meanwhile, Bree finds Matthew in Danielle's room and she freaks out because she doesn't trust the Applewhite family and she certainly doesn't want her daughter to be dating Matthew, especially because after finding the body in the car, basically the whole neighborhood is suspicious of the Applewhites and think that it has something to do with them. Danielle's really upset because she actually really likes Matthew, and so she's crying in bed about it later, saying that everything is Bree's fault and because she's miserable, she's trying to inflict that same misery on everyone else. And this is another clear indicator that Bree's life is really falling apart, because now it's not only her son that hates her, but it's her daughter too. Bree's trying to make amends, and so she says that maybe she'll buy Danielle pizza, and she agrees that it's okay for Danielle to date Matthew as long as there's some kind of supervision going on, which I honestly thought, for Bree, that was so much progress. So she goes to talk to Betty about it and sees Caleb through a window. So she calls her friends on the phone and she's like, oh my god, guys, you'll never believe what's up with the Applewhites. I think their son is this weird intruder breaking into people's houses. Danielle, her daughter, overhears, and because Danielle's dating Matthew, she gives him a heads up about what's going on and that his family secret might come out. And so Matthew tells his mum, Betty. Danielle mentions how Bree covered up a hit and run that Andrew was involved in. So before the poker game starts, Betty approaches Bree and threatens her and says, if you report my son to the police or anything like that, I have dirt on you and dirt on your son, so now we're even. Bree understands that, but she still wants more information about Caleb. So she gets a spare key and she ends up going into the house when Betty's out to talk to Caleb. And he tells her the reason he's been locked up is punishment because he hurt a girl called Melanie who died. A while later, when his mum comes home, Caleb informs her that a pretty redhead woman had come to see him that day. And Bree's basically the only redhead woman in the suburbs, so Betty knows exactly who he's talking about, and she goes to visit Bree to talk to her about it. She ends up telling Bree the story so Bree won't completely demonize her and will understand what was going on. So she says that Melanie Foster was actually Matthew's girlfriend. They'd been fighting a lot and they'd broken up. Caleb had called Melanie and asked to meet her in the lumber yard, and Caleb said that he wanted to be her boyfriend instead of Matthew, and Melanie obviously laughed in his face and she was like, I just dated your brother, you weirdo, I'm not gonna date you. And Caleb tried to kiss her and Melanie was like, what's wrong with you? And so she slapped him, and then he got really angry and he ended up hitting her really hard with this axe. Betty felt responsible because she hadn't protected him from himself. Bree processes that information, and a while later she goes to a dinner party at her friend Maxine's house, and she thinks it's odd that her friend can have prepared so much food that she's claiming to have cooked all by herself. But then the FBI arrives with a warrant to search Maxine's house, and they find a woman locked downstairs. She's a Chinese slave called Xiao Mei who's busy cooking, and this again was, I thought, a really racist subplot that just did not need to be there and could have been handled way better. Like, the constant reference to her being a slave is just really weird, and in general the character is a very strange woman and her motivations make no sense, so it's clear they put absolutely no thought into it at all. Gabrielle and Carlos are asked if they can look after Xiao Mei, and she's currently awaiting plans to return to China. So Gabrielle at first is kind of hesitant, but she eventually says yes. One minute she's claiming that she loves Gabrielle and Carlos like they're her family, and the next minute she's going behind Gabrielle's back trying to seduce her husband Carlos. Zach discovers that Mike is his biological birth father, so he's very excited. Bree starts developing a drinking problem. Lynette asked her to babysit her kids, so Bree does, and they end up wandering out by themselves, and then she lies to Lynette about it and says that she was paying attention, she was just in the kitchen. But then Lynette looks through Bree's trash and finds like 12 alcohol bottles. Andrew starts using Bree's drinking problem as an opportunity to use it as leverage against her and make her feel guilty about stuff. But then he starts making up all kinds of lies about her abusing him so that he can get his trust fund early and get out of her hair, which Bree doesn't want to do because she feels like he's her son, he's under her roof, and she wants a chance to fix him. So she decides to go to Alcoholics Anonymous, not for herself, but just to seem like she's doing something and she's recovering and stuff, so that no one could say that she's not interested in bettering herself. So she starts going to this Alcoholics Anonymous thing, and she meets a guy there called Peter who was an addict of multiple things, and they start bonding and actually developing a kind of relationship. Bree is trying with Andrew in her own way. Like, she invites Andrew's boyfriend Justin over for dinner, but Andrew's just so resentful towards her because he wanted his money. Gabrielle and Carlos are still set on having a baby despite her miscarriage, but Gabrielle's got complications regarding getting pregnant and she's not sure if she'll ever be able to, so they just decide that instead they're going to adopt. But every possible thing that you could imagine going wrong goes wrong. They keep having issues, or someone doesn't want to give up their baby when they said they would, or they're seen as not fit parents because of Gabrielle having an affair with an underage gardener, and just things keep coming up. There's this little almost love triangle thing happening between Susan and these three guys who all like her: Ron, the doctor, Mike, the plumber, and Carl, her ex-husband. They're all interested in her, and Carl keeps trying to ruin her relationship with Ron by having Ron and Mike fight. Ron seems like a really good love interest at first for Susan, but they kept trying to make him look bad and they turned him into a total douche. At one point he chose to tell Susan he loved her for the first time when she was under an anesthetic, so she was all loopy and not making any sense. And then he got mad at her when she didn't respond well, which I thought was so stupid, because how could you expect her to give a good answer when you're about to perform surgery on her and she's been drugged? So whatever, he behaved so childishly. At one point he attacked Mike, and then when Mike went to fight back, he turned and ran in the opposite direction, so he was just such a loser. The others faced more genuine issues, like issues in the workplace in Lynette's case, miscarriage in Gabrielle's situation, alcoholism for Brie. They all had something going on, and Susan's just got these pointless arcs happening that are just sort of there. She literally just went on some bad dates and that was it. And the actress Terry Hatcher, who plays her, basically agreed. And when asked what Susan's arc has been, she said, "Susan hasn't had an arc. Mark has said it's been a giant problem from the beginning. They've sort of thrown some things up against the wall and tried to see if they'd stick, and they haven't. It's hard to invest in the arc of what you're trying to do with your work when you literally show up and there's no script to shoot. That's the way this year has gone," which I agree with, because Susan was definitely the weakest out of all four of the women this season. Meanwhile, Edie's mad because she finds out about the marriage between Carl and Susan, so Carl proposes to Edie to try and impress her and throws her an engagement party. At the engagement party, Felicia, the neighbor, presents Edie and Carl with a gift, which is her sister Martha Huber's teeth, in the hope of reminding everyone that Paul killed her sister Martha, which is true. And so Paul felt publicly humiliated and basically left the party, which is awkward. But Paul Young's troubles with Felicia continued because she's still trying to avenge the fact that he murdered her sister. So he keeps tripping because she's leaving stuff on his steps. His lighter fluid is replaced with gasoline, so he almost burns his face off. And there was this hilarious scene where he woke up one morning to find that his entire house was covered in an exterminator's tent. And then Felicia appeared and said, "Oh, sorry, I gave the wrong address to the exterminator." Like, it's so funny. Can I just say, out of all the characters, I think Felicia's one of my favorites. Carl visits Susan and tells her that his engagement to Edie is off and he wants to be with Susan and he's in love with her. And Susan's really excited, so they hook up. And then the next morning she figures out that Carl basically lied to her and he's still with Edie, which means that he's now tried to make Susan the other woman, and Susan's furious and kicks him out. And then he breaks up with Edie anyway. So Edie is sure that he cheated on her and she's determined to find out who with, and Susan's too ashamed to tell her the truth, but eventually she ends up writing a letter and posting it to Edie, basically apologizing and saying that she didn't know that Carl and Edie weren't broken up or she never would have slept with him, which I thought was honestly fair enough. But Edie gets so angry at Susan because she has this thing of wanting to compete with her, and then she burns Susan's house down. I was liking Edie's character a lot before this in season 1, and I thought that maybe she was just a bit misunderstood, but honestly she's a total bitch. And I don't care that Susan burned her house down in season 1, it doesn't matter, it was an accident. And I think that that's very different from intentionally, spitefully burning someone's house down. Carl's the perpetrator here, and the only person who should have their house burned down is Carl, because he was the one who lied to both of the women. Another thing I didn't like about season 2 is something that happens with Andrew, where they just take it way too far to try and show these power games going on between him and his mother. He invites over Bree's recovered addict boyfriend, and he figures out that Peter's bisexual and they end up hooking up. Keep in mind, Andrew's first of all not 18 yet, and second of all, that's his mum's 50-year-old boyfriend. boyfriend. And then he makes sure that his mum comes home to find the two of them together. Bree's so devastated and angry that the next morning she drops Andrew off at this hotel place with money and his clothes and basically tells him to just go away. And I don't blame her, but I think the show took it way too far. That Andrew is like our main gay character in the show, and him coming out is associated with him being violent, sociopathic, aggressive, and vengeful. So I really hope that at the end of the show, Bree will be proud of Andrew and his identity, and Andrew will be proud of himself and his gay identity, because otherwise it's just very icky. Lynette is pissing me off because she places her kids in Mrs. McCluskey's care and follows Tom to Atlantic City, her husband, because she thinks that he's cheating on her, which is one of so many incidents where she thinks he's cheating on her when there's literally no evidence for it. And so she looks through the window and sees something that kind of looks like he's with someone, and she jumps to so many conclusions. And so she literally takes the kids and disappears. So when Tom gets home, he doesn't know where she is. And it's not that he was cheating on her, it's that he has another child from a one-night stand years ago, and he was trying to find out if it was true or not. And then Lynette goes and has a whole sob about it, like, you put me through so much pain, you have no idea how much you scared me, as if it's his fault when she could have just asked him, hey hun, are you having an affair? At the same time, Bree's having this birthday party for her daughter Danielle because she's been a bit out of it ever since she kicked Andrew out of home. She's a disaster, really, and she's getting really controlling, and her daughter, rather than being sympathetic, is being really mean about it and blaming her mum for everything. And so she says that she's going to take Matthew, her boyfriend, and run away from home for good. And that's when Bree realizes she's actually losing it, and she thinks she's having a nervous breakdown. So she checks herself into like a mental health facility. Felicia Tillman is still planning her act of revenge on Paul Young. She was pumping out her own blood so that she could scatter it around his house as if he'd killed her. And she was calling the police to say that Paul was threatening her and making her scared. When Paul woke up in the middle of the night, he found her blood everywhere and two of her severed fingers. So she was trying to make it seem as if he'd assassinated her. So Paul ends up in prison, and he's going to need a lot of money for some very expensive lawyers, because first of all, he knows that he killed her sister, so he's already a murderer and should be in jail technically. And second of all, she's faked her death pretty convincingly, so he needs money. So he asks Zach to go to his biological grandfather, who's very rich with a lot of connections, to try and get some money. So Zach does. He goes to his grandfather, but his grandfather's being really rude about it and basically saying that he doesn't want to give them any money. And it seems like his grandfather's going to cut him off from inheriting his large estate. And so Zach gets really pissed off and kills Noah, his grandfather, by unplugging his breathing machine thing. We get a flashback to the night of Melanie Foster's murder in the finale, and we learn that Matthew had actually been the one to kill Melanie because he found her there unconscious after Caleb had hit her, but she was still alive. He was doing it from more of a place of trying to protect his brother than anything else. In the present day, Betty, his mum, finds out that he was the one who'd actually killed Melanie, and she's furious because obviously she was planning on killing Caleb. She'd been locking him up in the basement, but he wasn't actually the one to kill Melanie. I thought the finale of season 2 was amazing, and I enjoyed it just as much as the season 1 finale. I'll start with Gabrielle and Carlos and what happens to them in the finale. So Gabrielle finds out that Carlos was cheating on her with their live-in maid, but that really lacked emotional impact because her relationship with Carlos already seems quite shallow. She definitely wants someone to be more romantic with her. Like, she was really touched when John bought her a red rose in season 1 at the same time that Carlos had bought her a big flashy car. So maybe Carlos will become that romantic, soft guy. I hope that changes and he softens a bit, but I still don't like his character at the moment. While she's in the mental health facility, Bree meets this guy called Orson, who's a visitor. At the end of the episode, he goes and hits Mike with a car, so because Mike recognized him for some reason. So obviously this guy's a bit dodgy, but I know he'll start pursuing this relationship with Bree in season 3. She learns that Matthew was the real killer, and so she's really worried about him running off with her daughter Gabrielle without Gabrielle knowing the kind of guy he is. So she escapes from the hospital, which was iconic, and she runs back to home, and she sees Matthew and Gabrielle there gathering their stuff about to run away. Matthew whips out a gun, and the police arrive and shoot him down. Betty and Caleb end up moving away to start afresh, and you don't even really see their reaction to their son or brother being murdered by the police, they just move out. Lynette really pissed me off in the finale. I wanted to say that she was my favorite character, but she's really aggravating me with this jumping to conclusions thing about cheating. But I can't say Gabrielle because she's still too shallow for me at the moment. And Susan, I really want to like Susan, but her storylines are just repetitive involving her love life, you know? So I actually don't know. I'm thinking Brie because I like her character development the most. It may change in the future.
John, where are you? Damn it!
I have to say though that I loved season 3. It's my favorite season so far. I thought it was amazing. Desperate Housewives reminds me a lot of other shows I've seen, like Dead to Me and Big Little Lies, which is one of the reasons I'm enjoying it so much. But I was surprised by how much I fell in love with season 3 and 4. As a response to the series' problematic and criticized second season, Mark Sherry decided to fast forward 6 months for the season 3 premiere. Why have I been calling him Mark Sherry this whole time? Oh my god, he's not a wine. Anyway, he said that he regretted most of season 2 because due to scheduling problems, it made it harder for him to plan ahead in terms of the plot. The cast also expressed disappointment about the second season. James Denton, who plays Mike, considered leaving the show. So as a result, season 3 was a huge improvement. The character I thought that I'd start off with is Susan. She's probably the most disliked out of all the women, and if you look at the Reddit page for Desperate Housewives, there's a whole flare called Susan Meyer Hate, and there isn't one for the other women. But so far I'm still liking her character in season 3. She's definitely the funniest out of the main women, to me at least. I feel like her comedic timing is always excellent, and it's really funny when she puts herself in awkward situations. They definitely brought back the more traditional romance story between Susan and Mike that was present in season 1 and missing in season 2, which I really appreciated. There is a love triangle in season 3 between Susan and Ian and Mike. Ian's a new character that's introduced who Susan meets in the hospital because she's visiting Mike, who's in a coma from a hit and run. Ian has a wife who's in a coma, and they both kind of find comfort in each other. And at this point, Mike's been in a coma for 6 months. So Susan feels like maybe it's time to let go of him and move on because she doesn't know if he'll ever wake up. And this love triangle created a lot of opportunity for comedic moments, I thought. That in the media, male on male rivalry or fighting over a woman is often very romanticized and seen as cute, but the minute that it's two women fighting over a man's attention, it's called a cat fight or boyfriend stealing. And I think that shows the sexist double standard we have in society when it comes to things like this. Ian and Mike were going behind each other's backs at points, or they were betting on Susan in a poker game, or they were doing various things that should be considered catty, but yet you don't hear people calling it catty. And I just think that's really interesting, because if it was Susan and, let's say, Edie fighting over a guy doing basically the same thing, people would probably be a lot more critical of their two characters and say that it was desperate and pathetic. Whereas I don't ever see Mike really getting a lot of hate for effectively trying to take Susan away from her boyfriend. But I really thoroughly enjoyed a lot of Susan's scenes in season 3. I thought that Mike was given way more sass and personality than he had in season 2. And I loved that Susan got over her ego issue around wanting this big fancy wedding when Mike isn't someone that can provide that for her. So when she eventually ends up separating from her boyfriend Ian and going back to Mike again, when they do get married at the end of the season, she's comfortable with having a more simple and heartfelt wedding, and I felt like that was really beautiful. But let's just retrace our steps so you guys can kind of follow what's going on, because I know it's a very messy plot, it's very complicated. At the beginning of season 3, Susan is devastated because Mike is in a coma. He was hit by Orson, who's a new character that's just been introduced into the series, and we don't really know what Orson's motive is. When Mike wakes up, Susan isn't there at the time. Edie's there. Edie's character really takes a turn for the worse, and I'll get into that later. I didn't like it, but Edie comes to the hospital and she's really glad that she can be there when Mike wakes up, because she and Susan have always had a bit of a rivalry over Mike. She just sees the opportunity to manipulate Mike, so she starts messing with his memories and making out that him and Susan were never actually that serious, and Susan wasn't the best girlfriend anyway, and using it as a way to get close to Mike because he's vulnerable and he doesn't have his memories. He's actually suffering from some sort of amnesia due to his accident. When Susan catches Mike and Edie making out, it really hurts her and it causes her to go to Ian and pursue something more serious with him because she just can't do it anymore. And I do feel that she gave up very easily on Mike, like she just let Edie win. I did think it was really funny, Susan's reaction when she found out that Mike and Edie were together, because it obviously put a huge damper on her day. So she went to see Lynette, who'd also had a bad day, and they sat there drinking, and Susan was trying to theorize ways to kill Edie without going to prison. And then she made this comment like, oh, I wish Paul Young was here, he'd know what to do. At this point, I wasn't sure about what my feelings towards Ian were, so I wasn't mad that Susan was dating him, but I grew up in England and it really bothered me how Ian basically fits into every British stereotype there is. He has this very posh accent, he has a lovely big fancy house and a butler. His wife got injured in a horse riding accident, and they also really dragged out him and Susan's storylines. I felt like their arc could have been over in about 4 episodes, but it took up way too much time. I know Mike could be considered a boring character as well, but I feel like he's not at all, because everyone in this show is so intense and reactive and dramatic that it's so nice to have a grounded, stable character like Mike, who's consistent and calm and just a good guy. I find it very refreshing, whereas Ian to me was more pompous and annoying. It was really gross of him to propose to Susan only because he thought that Mike had tried to propose to Susan before the coma, so Ian feels threatened or something, like he's trying to prove himself. And then Susan meets Ian's longtime butler and colleague, who starts being horrible to Susan, slut-shaming her because the butler has this idea in his head that Ian is still technically committed to his wife and therefore he's cheating or something. Ian just ignores it and acts like it's not a big deal or laughs it off, and then when he does address it, it's not with half as much defensiveness as it should be. Like, he should want to protect his girlfriend from that. It's just not very attractive that he would just sit back and let her fend for herself for the most part. Susan was fully committed to Ian, I do believe, and she was very happy to go and move to London with him if she needed to, but what pushed her away was his paranoia. I also felt like the situation was more complicated morally than just a normal cheating storyline, because cheating's always wrong, trying to take someone away from their partner is wrong. But Mike had been in a coma and lost his memories. He didn't know how much he loved Susan until his memories started coming back, and by that point she was already with Ian, and I think Mike was trying to get her back before she was married to Ian, and it was too late, so it wasn't really fully his fault. Susan definitely still played a part in the problems with her relationship with Ian, and she definitely was playing both of the guys and making it way more complicated than it needed to be. Ian asked Susan specifically not to see Mike anymore, and it was like Susan couldn't respect his wishes, and she kept finding excuses to go and talk to Mike, and she keeps almost bouncing between the two of them, and then when one of them rejects her, she goes back to the other one and she can't actually make a firm decision. After rejecting Mike for Ian, she then decides she doesn't want Ian and then runs back to Mike, and Mike was so happy to just take her back. She'd literally just dropped him a day earlier for another guy. But I am glad that she chose Mike in the end and that it worked out, because I think they're so much of a better couple, and I've rooted for them right from the beginning in the same way that I've rooted for Orson and Bree right from the beginning, because there's definitely a connection there, and her and Ian played into each other's insecurities right from the beginning. They were on this romantic weekend getaway, and they should be in like the honeymoon stage. They shouldn't be particularly critical of each other. I feel like that's something that only happens in the later stage of a relationship, where you do really fully realize that the person has flaws and they're not perfect. He found out how many people she'd slept with, which was 11, and he started making her feel really bad about it, to the point that at first she lied and said she'd only slept with 9 people because she thought that maybe he'd approve of that more, so she didn't feel comfortable. She's like 39, so her sleeping with 11 people isn't that incomprehensible to me. I think she started having sex pretty young too, at like 16, so if you think about that, it's not that weird. Another storyline that was very key in season 3 is Susan learns that her daughter Julie is now back on the dating scene again, and she's dating Austin, who's like the local bad boy, and Edie's nephew, which really bothers Susan because she doesn't like Edie that much, first of all, but also she feels that her daughter is too young for this, especially if she's having sex. Sometimes Susan struggles to manage Julie correctly, and she's definitely a pretty negligent parent in that sense. And she only has 1 kid to look after. Now, season 4 is a bit of a different story, but I'll get into that later because we're not talking about that right now. But I do want to discuss Gabby next in season 3. Now, where we left off, she'd just been cheated on by Carlos. By the way, I'm really sorry if I mix Gabby/Gabrielle's name up with Danielle, who's Bree's daughter. Apparently I did that in the last video. I'm really sorry. But Gabby and Carlos are fighting a lot in the beginning of season 3. They're feuding, they're wanting to divorce. Even though they're simultaneously divorcing, there's clearly still feelings there because there's a lot of passion in their arguments and everything. And Gabby keeps trying to hurt Carlos by showing that she's dating different men, and the whole thing was very weird. I thought they were super toxic at the beginning of season 3, and I was really happy when they finalized it and actually separated. But then Carlos starts to calm down a bit and they have some time apart, and he definitely starts to become a better character, and that's the first time I've ever said that in the entire series, because I didn't really like him earlier. I thought he was horrible and misogynistic and shallow. When they're apart, I feel like they're so much better, and there are quite a few scenes where they start to form a friendship again and warm up to each other. And then Gabby starts fake dating Zach Young, who's Mike's biological son, and Zach was a total creep in season 1, but you have no idea. Him in season 3 is another level. First of all, that hair is crusty. I can't take him seriously. Like, what the hell? He looks so weird. But also his attitude is just off because he's gotten really rich and made a bunch of money, so he's very arrogant and he doesn't know how to relate to women normally at all, and he's decided he wants to seduce Gabby. I mean, he is of a legal age, but it's still very disturbing. And also there was this really gross scene where she woke up in bed with him shirtless, and he was trying to make out that they'd slept together to try and manipulate her into thinking maybe she was attracted to him, and obviously that wasn't true. There were multiple points, like twice, where he literally sexually assaulted her and kissed her without her consent, or just made an unwanted move. Another storyline in season 3 is Carlos realizing he still has feelings for Gabby and trying to get her back. I was not mad about it. I thought it was sweet. He was being less unhealthily territorial around her and more grounded. Like, he's definitely toned down the anger management issues. He cheated on her in the finale of season 2. Now he's trying to get her back. If he likes her this much, why did he cheat on her in the first place? And now he's realizing all along she's the woman for him. Like, if you like her that much, then why did you cheat on her? That doesn't really make much sense to me. Victor Lang, a candidate running for mayor, starts flirting with Gabrielle, and he's quite a bit older than her. He's got like grey hairs. He's probably like, God, I don't want to get this wrong, 50 or 60? Some people would consider it a little bit weird, like he's trying to win her as his young wife or something, because the minute he looks at her, he's like, I want to marry that woman, which I found a little weird. No, he didn't say I want to, he said I'm going to. She's not even playing hard to get, she is hard to get because she's not actually interested. But then he does a few things that show he has a heart, and she realizes that she likes him more when he's not putting on this act and when he's just being himself. As he got to know her, he realized, wait, we're not like actually that compatible. She's not cut out for his political lifestyle, nor does she understand it or want to understand it. And she might actually do more damage to his campaign than good. And she also doesn't understand his lifestyle, how hard he needs to work, how much money he needs to make, the fact that he can't make time for her 24/7, and she can't handle that because she already had that with Carlos. That's why she cheated on him with the teenage gardener, because she felt completely ignored, and I don't think she wanted a repeat of that situation, which is fair enough, like I get it, but at the same time Gabby is very high maintenance. And just because Carlos didn't make time for you, that's something you should talk to him about. You don't go and become a total pedo. I did think that Victor was a very weirdly written character though, and his motives were very poor. One minute they wanted it to seem like he's very shallow and just trying to seduce her. Like after they sleep together for the first time, he doesn't call her, which is insanely disrespectful. But the next minute he's saying, I'm in love with you, and he seems to mean it. And then the next minute, he's actually not making time for her. But then, right at the end, he's saying, I need you to love me and all I've ever wanted is for you to want me. And so his intentions seem genuine again. But despite their ups and downs, they end up getting engaged and then married in the finale of season 3. Gabby realizes that she actually doesn't like him that much because it seemed like he was only dating her because he thought she'd make him look good for his voters. It was very bad, but rather than talking to him about it, Gabby goes and cheats on him with Carlos. Season 3 was probably my favorite season for her, for sure, but she's still a bit of a shitty person, like to put it lightly. I still haven't forgotten about what she did to John Rowland, the gardener, in season 1, and she actually met him again in season 3, which I find really gross. Like, this dude keeps coming back. And there's definitely an expectation for female characters to be perfect, and then when male characters have flaws, it's what makes us love them more or think they're complicated or something. So I don't mind that Gabby's a shitty person, but I do think it's weird when people say she's a good person or try to justify her behavior. She's also really mean in season 3. Like, she becomes super power hungry when she gets with Victor because she realizes that she has this status as the mayor's wife, and she loves the idea of being able to do illegal things or get away with stuff because she gets a free pass. And she loves the ego boost of knowing that Carlos has a crush on her and her being unavailable to him. She also really pissed me off when she was doing her wedding planning because she started copying Susan's wedding plans to Ian, which is so wrong. I'm talking down to the flower bouquets, the aesthetics of it, and she wasn't telling her. And then when Susan was pissed off, she was like, oh, I can pay you money for your planning or whatever. Like, no, you can't just take someone's creative, intimate ideas that's personal to them for their wedding and then recreate it for yours. Susan was right to be pissed off with her about that. Like, that's just such a disrespectful and messed up thing to do. So Gabby does this a lot, you know, where she thinks she's entitled to certain things just because she's Gabby. The next one I want to talk about is Edie in terms of characters, and I have to say that out of all the characters in season 3, I was disappointed with Edie takes the cake. Edie was originally introduced as a recurring character in season 1. She's in and out of the show, she has her sassy one-liners and disappears again. They realized how great she was and they started to bring her back as a series regular. It's different to a movie. With a movie, once it's done, but with a series, you can gauge public reaction and make changes along the way, which can sometimes actually ruin your work because you start listening too much to what the fans want rather than what is effective for the art. But in this case, I think it was a good decision to make Edie part of the main cast. She's an excellent character, but not in season 3. In season 3, Edie went down the drain. I'm so done with her, it's not even funny. Edie just keeps taking other people's dirty laundry, and by that I mean ex-boyfriends. Edie and Carlos are a thing in season 3. Oh my god. She tries to date Orson, I think, in season 4. And then we've got Mike, Susan's first husband she tried to take. There's something so weird about it, don't you think, when there's a pattern like this? And I know there's a bro code. There's definitely rules around that, but it's the same for girl code. Like, if she has any respect for these women and she wants them to like her, and she's apparently so sad she doesn't have friends, she's not doing a very good job of making friends, is she? Rule 101, don't date someone's ex-husband. It's weird. Her dating Mike was properly crossing the line though, because it's not just like dating him, it was seducing him and manipulating him and messing with his memories and changing photos. Also, I find it hard to believe logically that Edie could so easily trick Mike and take him away from Susan. If Susan saw this happening, which she did, she could have just asked her friends and neighbors to come by, talk to Mike in a big group, back up her story, and then Mike would realize it was all of their words against Edie's. But instead, Susan just sort of lets him go. She ends up dating Carlos in season 3 as well, and these two were just such a terrible couple. One minute he's saying he wants a serious relationship, and then he starts saying that he just wants some fun with Edie, and she's meant to be the fun single one, but now she's pathetically desperate for a boyfriend, desperate to make Carlos love her and commit to her, to not just be seen as this casual thing. They took up way too much screen time. It was ridiculous, and they were boring. Carlos never treated Edie well from the beginning, and it seemed like he only wanted to be with her because we found out that Edie has a child from a previous relationship. Carlos is almost enjoying spending time with the three of them like a happy little family, and he's always wanted a kid, but that doesn't mean he wants Edie. It means it's just his wish fulfillment around having a family because Gabby never wanted kids. He was taking way too long to break up with Edie too, and sort of keeping Gabby hanging around when he really wanted to be with Gabby. And then when Gabby asked why Carlos was still sleeping with Edie, he said, because I'm a guy, as if that justifies it. Forget Carlos for a second. What Edie does to try and keep him is appalling. Carlos wasn't taking her seriously. He wasn't treating her right. And it's like she loses all of her bad bitch energy and all her self-respect, and she just grovels to try and get him to want her. It's so sad. She fakes suicide, hoping he'll stay with her out of guilt. She basically proposes to herself and then tries to blackmail him into being engaged. Then when she's annoyed and feeling rejected, she goes to Victor and she shows him photos of Gabby and Carlos kissing, and she says Gabby's cheating on you, hoping that he'll hurt Carlos and hurt Gabby, even though Victor's a dangerous man and should not have that information. Then she used Carlos's money to buy things without his permission. And then she faked that she wanted to get pregnant with him and have a child with him to deceive him and trap him into a relationship. Then she knew that Carlos wanted a son, so she tried to get her son to move closer and stick around, even though it was inconveniencing her kid. And the worst part of it all is how delusional she is, because I think she says to Gabby in the next season, if you're not going to treat Carlos right, there's plenty of women who will. I think I proved that. So she learned nothing and still thinks somehow that she was good to him. I did not like her in season 3, and I really hope she will get better. Another character who pissed me off in season 3 was Lynette. Lynette was my second least favorite in season 3. Not as bad as Edie, but boy, was she getting on my nerves. The second half of season 3 is the worst of Lynette's moments by far. At first, like I said, Lynette was doing fine. She meets Nora, who she thought Tom was cheating on her She thought Tom was cheating on her with Nora, but Nora was just an old flame of Tom's who ended up getting pregnant and having his kid. Tom didn't know about this. So now she's getting to know Nora and the new kid, because the kid is going to be a part of their lives. The child's called Kayla, and it's stressful for Lynette because she's got enough kids, and Kayla isn't even biologically hers, but at the same time it is Tom's kid. The mum is very unwell. I don't know what's wrong with her, but she's just very mean and all over the place and intense with her emotions and just very hard to handle and quite paranoid too. She definitely accuses Lynette of having really awful intentions when it's not accurate to what's going on. But then Nora actually ends up dying, which is very hard because it means that Kayla is super traumatized and blames Lynette for her mum's death. And how it all happens is in this amazing episode called Bang, which features a supermarket shooting. I thought this was one of the best episodes of the series because it was so different. Since that episode was such a success, they've started trying to introduce more disaster episodes like every season. But Bang was a pivotal episode for Lynette's character development, and it was really nice because often in season 1 and 2 Lynette kind of was on the back burner when it came to storylines, and hers just weren't as good as the other girls. But in Bang, Lynette is like at the forefront of the episode and she's important. She's the only one of the main girls who's actually trapped in the supermarket with Nora when the shooting is happening. The event gives her a big moment of closure around Mary Alice's death, the woman who died at the beginning of season 1, who was a friend of theirs. They don't really mention Mary Alice anymore because it's season 3 now, so maybe Lynette was closer to her than the other women were. Carolyn, the woman who was the shooter, was about to shoot Lynette as well. Then a new neighbor saves Lynette's life, and Lynette is super grateful for this. So the next episode, she bakes a thank you cake for this new neighbor, and she feels very emotional about the whole experience. tense. The new neighbor's called Art Shepherd. She thinks that he may be a pedophile because he has lots of photos of shirtless boys. Now, in a way it made sense because it looked very bad. She mentions it to someone and then the whole neighborhood is talking about this guy and protesting and saying he's dangerous, which makes Lynette guilty because of course what she saw was weird and should be investigated, but it's not solid proof. We don't actually know for sure. An innocent man may be accused of something he didn't do. Then she goes to talk to Art about it, but he's actually going to move away because the whole neighborhood hates him and he blames Lynette. He then gets really creepy with Lynette and threatens to resort to his emotions for kids and stuff now that his sister's dead. Why would you threaten her with something like that? If you want to prove that you're not a bad guy, don't give her ammunition to think that you're a bad guy. Why would you say that? But it really bothered me that he just disappears from the show and they never actually explain what the deal was with that. I still felt like Lynette was compelling. She was doing her best. She made mistakes, as we all do. But in the second half of season 3, that's when things really go sour for Lynette, big time. And I just could no longer support her. The emotional cheating happens. Yes, you heard that right. Now, as I mentioned in my previous reviews, Lynette is paranoid about Tom cheating on her to the point that she follows him like a stalker if she thinks he's doing something wrong. At least I could respect that. These are her morals. She just feels really strongly about loyalty and fidelity and not cheating, and that's just one of her things. I can respect that. That's her moral compass. But I guess the rules only apply to Tom and not to her. Lynette hires this new chef called Rick, and she starts having feelings for him. And I guess that's okay because it's her. What? Are you kidding me? She's flirting with him and she's spending all this time hanging out with him, pretending she's working after the pizzeria is closed because Tom sets up this pizzeria place, right? So she's there with this new chef, working with him and collaborating, and she's really involved with Tom's pizzeria. So she keeps making these excuses like, oh, I'm busy, we're organizing the menu. But she's basically on a dinner date with this Rick guy. They're just sitting over a meal and talking about nothing. And she should be home with her husband looking after her kids. But she's not. Night after night she's doing that, forming this emotional attachment to Rick. She has multiple opportunities to set boundaries, to say, sorry, I'm not available, but she doesn't, which is leading Rick on because he'll think, cool, she wants me. And then she's pissed off at him for making it real and saying it aloud. She's like, why would you say that? The only person she should be mad at is herself. Of course he was going to say, you know, I have a huge crush on you because you were leading into that, weren't you? I know this is a soap opera, so of course it's going to be dramatic, but I just can't stand Tom and Lynette anymore. I think they are the most toxic couple in the entire series. The best thing for them to do would be to just divorce. I mean, they're fighting constantly and neither of them wants to tell the other what's on their mind. So they go behind the other person's back to do things. Like Tom wanted to see a marriage counselor with Lynette, but he was worried she wouldn't want to. So he secretly brings in a counselor, pretending it's a friend, to try and let them have a marriage counseling session without her realizing it was one. Then Lynette is pathetically salty and upset over the fact that she had to fire Rick because she misses him. Wah. So she's there crying in the bathroom and for weeks on end is in a sour mood, missing Rick and resenting Tom because she had to fire Rick. She was just annoying me with how she interacts with Tom in general. I feel like she can be a real buzzkill and just really negative. She's really disrespectful to him when it came to opening their business together. She's the boss at home, she tells him what to do, and they agreed that at work it would be the other way around and he's the boss of the pizzeria, so she reports to him, and that's why he gets to not be emasculated for once and he gets to actually be dominant sometimes, which could be good, like a healthy balance. But Lynette cannot let go of control, so even though they had that agreement, at work she keeps talking back to him and even making fun of him and undermining him in front of his employees. She also keeps whinging about needing to wear the uniform he asked her to and making it into this big deal when it's not. Lynette's actress is definitely the best out of all the women in the main cast, so I thought it was really sad that she was being made so unlikable, but I did have hope for her in season 4 that she would be better, because right in the finale of season 3 she finds out that she probably has cancer, which could be a life-changing experience for her potentially and make her rethink her choices. But the final character I want to talk about is Bree before I get into the plot of season 3. Bree was totally my favorite in season 2, and I thought she was amazing compared to the uptight, emotionally repressed woman we meet in season 1. And season 3 was yet again an amazing season for Bree, and she was 100% my favorite character in season 3, like if I had to rank the women. She marries Orson, and he's a very suspicious man, and he is the center of the mystery aspect of the show in season 3, because every season follows a new kind of mystery. And as a result, it was amazing because she's married to him, but we don't know whether we can trust him or not. But at the same time, they have a really great relationship and great chemistry, and I think he totally adores her, and it's actually really sweet. She finally starts to heal her relationship with her son Andrew in season 3, which was so emotional for me. I nearly cried because all of season 1 and 2, it's just them hating each other, and finally they're coming to an understanding in season 3 where he starts to care for her again and love her, and she's too stupid to notice it, but he's actually warming up to her again. And I thought that was amazing considering he was basically one of the main villains of season 2. Andrew in season 3 is like genuinely amazing. He's one of my favorite characters. His one-liners, his sass, his wit was just amazing. And then in the finale of season 3, the character of Bree is seemingly pregnant. Her daughter Danielle hooked up with Austin, who was actually meant to be Julie's boyfriend at the time. By the way, side note, Danielle's probably one of my least favorite characters in the series. Like, she's a piece of trash. I literally can't with her. Danielle had admitted that after hooking up with Austin, she thinks she may be pregnant. And so I had a very strong feeling that Bree was faking her pregnancy so that then when her daughter had her baby, Bree could pretend it was her baby, because Bree would hate the shame of needing to admit to people that her teenage daughter got pregnant. And Bree's really into impression management, and I ended up being right, by the way. Bree never mentioned wanting more kids, and she's getting older now, so the chances of her wanting to be pregnant again seemed pretty slim to me, so it makes sense if she's faking it. But now what I want to talk about is the mystery aspect of season 3. I actually think it's worth recapping. It was really juicy. In episode 1, Bree and Orson become engaged, and we knew that they'd hit it off earlier. We've missed huge chunks of their relationship developing, but we see flashes of them together, and we see them kissing in the rain and all this, and it seems to be like a whirlwind relationship. The show is very clever with its misdirection into making you think that Orson is evil, because it shows a scene of him with his first wife and they make it sound like he killed her, and I was worried that Bree was going to be his next victim. And Bree hardly has a good track record with the men in her life. I mean, she had Rex, her first husband, who was really rude and distant and horrible and annoying, and then we had George, who was like a crazy stalker and she didn't even notice. So I did not have high hopes for Orson at all, considering her history and her poor judgment, right? I was scared for her, but it's not what you think. Carolyn, that neighbor who ends up doing the shooting in the supermarket, literally said that Orson killed his first wife, Alma. That makes Bree freak out. And there's basically this continual storyline unfolding throughout the season of the evidence piling up against Orson and him looking really bad in Bree's eyes. And meanwhile, Mike is being framed for something that looks like a murder because Mike's linked to it. It makes Susan and Bree have a fight because Susan thinks that Orson is responsible for what Mike's being framed for, and Bree wants to defend her husband Orson. So it creates this rivalry between Bree and Susan where they're both understandably trying to back up their men. There's this unidentified body found whose teeth are missing, and Orson claims not to know who it is, but he does know. It's actually his dead ex-lover Monique. He was dating her when he was already married to Alma. He's actually trying to protect someone, so he's not saying what's going on. He is incriminated in a murder, but he wasn't the actual killer, and he did not kill Alma, and he did not kill his lover Monique. Orson's mum comes to town, and she's very suspicious and very nasty, but since she and Orson are both so aggressive towards each other and always threatening to blackmail each other, it makes it really hard to tell who's good and who's evil, or if they're both evil. But then suddenly Orson's ex-wife Alma arrives in town and she's completely fine. And that was really odd because she'd basically disappeared and now she's okay. And she seems to just want to win Orson back. But then you realize there's this alliance going on between Orson's mum and Alma. And it seems like they both hate Orson. And Orson's mum genuinely believes this because she was cheated on a lot. She has this history of it. And so she doesn't like the idea of anyone cheating. And she doesn't like that Orson cheated on Alma. So she would actually be happy for Orson and Alma to end up together because in her mind that's right. Therefore she considers Bree a slut. And she considers that woman who died, Monique, a slut as well. Towards the end of the season, she ends up trying to murder Bree and make it look like Bree committed suicide in the bathtub. Now, luckily, Andrew and Orson arrived to save the day, and at that point, it's pretty obvious that Orson is like not a bad guy, and he's just been trying to protect his mother because she knew that Orson had been cheating with Monique. She hates sluts, so she killed Monique. And then Orson came in at the last minute and freaked out and had to help cover up the murder and bury the body, and then Orson's mum pulled out the teeth so it would be unidentifiable. But that's why Mike was sort of caught up in it, because he'd arrived that same night to do a plumbing job and walked in. That made Orson really paranoid that maybe Mike had seen something and had just pretended not to notice. And that's why when Orson moves into Wisteria Lane and realizes that Mike lives there, he freaks out when Mike recognizes him and hits him with his car because his mum told him to. She said, if he remembers something, if he knows something, we can't risk that because he can put us both in jail. And yes, it was awful for Orson to do, but at that point it makes sense, and he felt indebted to help his mother because even though he doesn't like her, he feels like he owes her something. When he was younger, his dad had killed himself, and because Orson was off doing other things, he wasn't responsible and he wasn't there to take care of his dad, and he feels guilty about it. And Orson's mum always uses that against him to guilt trip him, so it makes sense, right? When Orson comes in towards the end and he sees his mum trying to kill Bree in the bathtub, it gives him a vivid flashback to when he was younger and when he found his dad dead in the bathtub. And it makes him realize that actually his dad didn't end his own life. It was murder and it was her fault. And with that information, it changes everything for Orson, and he realizes he needs to cut ties with his mum completely. So he saves Bree, and then he pushes his mum away from her. And because she's quite old, his mum ends up having a stroke. Gloria locked up Alma. Alma tried to escape by climbing out the window, but then she fell off the roof and actually died. Alma had written this fake suicide note to try and get Orson's attention and manipulate him into wanting her in her handwriting. He put it next to her body to make it sound like she killed herself over the fact that maybe she'd killed Monique, so it was sort of setting Alma up for the murder of Monique. Then he moved his mum's paralyzed body next to Alma, and it worked because it looked like Alma had committed suicide, and then the next morning, Gloria, Orson's mum, had stumbled across the body and had a stroke from the shock of it. And I loved how everything came together. I thought Gloria was an incredible villain. I loved how hard it was to follow and figure out, and it was amazing. And this is only the summary, like it was so much more complicated than that. The only thing I don't like about this mystery storyline is the RAPE. I don't really want to say it, but it was skimmed over, and I really disliked that. Basically, as a way of trying to get Orson to love her again, Alma tries to seduce him by drugging him, being intimate with him, hoping that she'd get pregnant with his kid, and then out of obligation to her, he'd leave Bree. It was extremely disturbing and horrible, and yet when he and Bree find out what happened, he's just like, oh, my mom and Alma organized to have this happen to me. Wow, the lengths they go to, huh? That doesn't make sense. Like, this would traumatize you for at the very least months, but probably years or the rest of your life, to know you were violated like that. And already male sexual assault is not taken seriously enough, so I just find it really hard to believe that it would have no emotional impact on Orson whatsoever. The rest worked really well, but it was just that one thing, and the mystery, like I just explained, was so awesome. When I look back on the show so far, Susan was the best in season 1, Bree was the best in season 2, and Gabby and Bree were both the best in season 3. There could have been more of an emphasis, like I mentioned earlier, on developing pre-existing storylines rather than rushing into new ones. They waste a lot of good material, like the emotional impact on Orson after being violated like that, the pedo versus Lynette storyline, Edie's regrets and shame after things didn't work out with Mike should have been greater, considering she wanted to take him away from Susan for a long time. Then she got him, and then it wasn't all it was cracked up to be, and she was actually unsatisfied. Also, Austin and Julie's romance. Austin just leaves. What happened with that? And what happened to Mike's interactions with his son Zach? He wanted so long to connect with Zach, prove he loved him, to be be a good dad to him. Paul Young's in jail now too, so Mike has the opportunity to spend time with Zach, and yet he's not. Even when Zach came back to town to try and seduce Gabby, where was Mike when all of that was happening, you know? I would really have appreciated that stuff to be developed more. But aside from that, I thought season 3 was freaking amazing, and it's going to be hard to top it and to find something as good as that. I will definitely, for sure, be rewatching it in the future. But now, before I get into season 4 and what happens then, just go get yourself some tea. Let's just have a little interval rest break, and then I will be back with you shortly. I'm back. As I was saying, season 3 was basically a masterclass in how to do a mystery and how to do it well, where things added up, they made sense, but season 4 wasn't quite as good, in my opinion. The finale and the way they wrapped it up was really anticlimactic and underwhelming and unsatisfying. In terms of my overall thoughts about season 4, aside from the finale, I really liked it. I thought it was very strong. I loved the addition of Catherine as a character to like the main cast. I thought she was really a great choice. Catherine is a new woman who moves onto the street with her husband, Adam, and her daughter, Dylan. And the other women don't know her except for Susan, because apparently years ago Catherine lived on Wisteria Lane in the same house she's now moved back into. In season 2 with the Applewhite family, the stakes felt very low because the Applewhites were so disconnected from the rest of the main cast. I get that Betty Applewhite needed to create distance and avoid the other women for her own protection of not getting too close to anyone, but as a result you feel really alienated from her story, and it's kind of hard to care when the other women don't even have an attachment to her. But season 4 is the most distinctive and impressive by far, with how they incorporate and mold Catherine into the storyline with every main woman, and that's what makes it so powerful. Gabby and her have a bit of a moment where they butt heads because she thinks Gabby's flirting with her husband. Susan already knew her from years back, so they have that kind of history, and Susan introduces her to the other women and tries to welcome her into the group. That interconnected feeling is highlighted because of the fact that Catherine already has a connection to Wisteria Lane. She used to live there, and then for whatever reason, in weird circumstances, like Susan remembers, Catherine started being weird with Susan, and then suddenly she just disappeared and moved out, and no one knew why she left, and now she's moved back in as if nothing happened. Another thing I loved is the rivalry and the frenemies dynamic that starts to form between Bree and Catherine. Bree's never really had a competitor before, in that sense where she's actually jealous of someone and competing with someone. Like Susan's had it with Edie, but season 4 was Bree's opportunity to go face to face with Catherine, because when Catherine arrives, the thing you need to understand about her, if I have to summarize her personality, she's excellent at making enemies, and so when she sees that the other women sort of turn to Bree as a leader, Catherine doesn't like it because she's very dominating and controlling. She's also very secretive about why she moved out those years ago, about her ex-husband who we don't know anything about, and even with her current husband Adam, she does not tell him stuff. She never tells her daughter anything, and so Catherine's kind of a closed book to the other women as well. Catherine was the main reason that I loved season 4. I thought that she was an excellent new character. Another reason I liked season 4 is because there's a shift in the story where the girls go from being quite distant from each other and never telling each other stuff to agreeing that they need to start sharing important things with each other. I just want to talk about each of the women, so we'll start off with Susan. Susan went really downhill in season 4, if I'm entirely honest. At the end of season 3, when Susan was dehydrated and lost on a hiking trip looking for Mike, she realized that because she's looking for drama all the time, she put herself in that situation, and it gives her this cathartic realization that she can't be like that anymore, and if she ever gets out of that situation, she needs to stop being such a drama queen, and she swears to herself that she's not going to do that anymore. She clearly says she wants to be better and then does nothing about it. A lot of the critiques I hear about Susan say that she's selfish. I'm not seeing her so far as any more selfish than Gabby or Edie. Nothing that bad happens in her life for the most part, but yet she makes it so much worse than it actually needs to be. And that, if anything, is my problem with Susan. And her clumsiness has become really annoying now. Like, at first it was kind of cute and endearing, but now it's like they're just trying way too hard to make her likable. We knew she'd set Edie's house on fire in like season 1, and that was already bad enough because her clumsiness was actually affecting other people. But in season 3, she accidentally sets her mother-in-law on fire when she was engaged to Ian, going to marry him. She accidentally drives her car into a lake, and then Mike has to come and save her and Ian. And then in season 4, again, the clumsiness is just continuing with people's constant jokes around Susan not being able to cook and her avoiding it because she's so clumsy. And it's like, learn to cook, girl. It's honestly pathetic. It's not even cute, it's just really annoying. And at one point, Susan's southern mother-in-law arrives and criticizes Susan for not being a complete housewife. And she was very rude, okay, unintentionally so, but rude. But the one good thing she did is she'd brought all her cooking utensils with her, and she was totally on board to help Susan learn how to cook, and she was going to teach her. And Susan was just like, oh, trust me, I'm a danger to everyone. And she just doesn't even try. She also meets her ex-husband Carl and his new wife, and they're pregnant with a baby on the way. It's really exciting. Susan's pregnant as well, and she's like, his life is perfect and mine isn't, and she's really insecure. And I'm thinking, why did you marry Mike and choose him over Ian if now in season 4 you're going to be so ungrateful and unsatisfied for the life you do have? Like, I don't see the issue. She's married with a baby on the way, Carl's married and now has a baby on the way, so you can just be happy for each other. But she's not. And then when she sees Mike, she tells him that he'll need to lie to Carl and pretend they have more money than they do, more success than they do. Susan chose Mike. He's a plumber. He works until late. They can't have the big fancy lifestyle. He can't fly her off to Paris every weekend. That's how it works. She chose him. She could have had the opportunity to go with the millionaire British Ian in season 3, and she turned it down. Susan also annoys me in season 4 because they suddenly have her turn into a massive conflict avoider. She went from a bit avoidant to being actually pathetic, like a complete doormat. Catherine and Adam divorce and they separate, and then the girls go to bring her some food to look after her and see how she's doing, and Catherine's really rude to them and basically says, you shouldn't have come here. And yet Susan sort of starts apologizing for the other girls, being like, oh yeah, we shouldn't have come. And it's just really pathetic. Like, she cannot stand up for herself. Then she meets her new neighbors. There are 2 gay men who move in down the street, and I'm not sure how big a role they'll play in the show, but Susan is desperate for them to like her. She does everything she can, including like stealing their dog so she can pretend to have saved the dog and they'll be grateful to her. And she just needs their validation so badly to the point that it's embarrassing. She and Mike are negotiating their different parenting styles. They're aware that parenting Julie will be hard because Julie's biologically not Mike's child, right? But then they hear about this crazy party that Julie wants to go to. Susan's happy for her to go. Mike isn't because he's worried. And then since Susan wants to please both of them and she can't make a decision between who to side with, she sort of ends up lying to Mike and pretending she hasn't let Julie go to the party when she has. That night, when she hears the party's getting really wild, she freaks out and thinks she needs to go and help Julie. So still in her lingerie with like a jacket thrown over her that's barely, not at all covering her boobs, she rushes out to the party to go and check on Julie and bring her home and make sure she's okay. Mock offended when some of the guys at the party think she's a stripper, and it really annoys me how often in the show they find an opportunity to put Susan in lingerie or be naked. It's infuriating. Julie gets an opportunity for a huge internship over the summer. I get that it's upsetting when your child leaves the nest. Like, it's hard. It was just so rude the way that Susan handled it, because she kept making up these excuses and lying to Julie, saying she didn't have the money for Julie to do the internship. But the fact was she just didn't want to be separated from Julie and was lying to her about it because she felt like she needed those 3 extra months with Julie Julie. Why bother lying to her and have her miss out on a potentially amazing opportunity? And the only reason Julie ended up managing to go was because Mike called Susan out on her behavior, which is something he should do more often, because I feel like so often he just lets her get away with stuff. Then at the end of season 4, Susan has her baby, and Mike wants to give it this really weird name. It's a very unusual name and he'll probably get bullied. Rather than just telling Mike straight up, sorry, the name's too strange, I don't like it, she lies and pretends she likes it, and then she goes behind Mike's back to try and have the name changed without his permission. Then she's a drama queen again, because Mike gets confirmation that Orson was the one who hit him in that hit and run, and Mike is pretty forgiving about it because he realizes that it was a mistake. Not a mistake, but Orson feels terrible about it. The guilt is tearing Orson apart, and that's all Mike needs to feel good about it, is just the reassurance that Orson won't do it again and feels bad. But Susan freaks out and she's like, oh my god, I cannot believe that Bree's husband nearly killed you. And rather than just processing it privately with Mike, she storms into Bree and Orson's house and starts yelling at Orson, saying what a terrible person he is. And Bree didn't know this about Orson. She had no idea. That was the one thing he didn't tell her. It makes a significant rift in their relationship. There was another point where she wanted to know Bree's gynecologist, and Bree doesn't want to tell her because Bree's not actually pregnant, so she doesn't actually need one right now, so she doesn't have one to recommend. But Susan's like, tell me. Then Bree ended up giving her some random gynecologist just to get Susan off her back. And Susan goes, and it was a very funny scene, but it was a really disgusting office and the seats were dirty, and Susan was like, oh my god, what's this? But then when Susan comes back, she demands an explanation from Bree as to why Bree lied to her and gave her a fake recommendation. Again, not Susan's business. Maybe stay out of it. It's like she's a teenage girl. Even like I said, with the fact that she behaves in a curiously childish way sometimes. It just makes me confused when people say that they detest Susan, but they love Gabby and Edie. I just don't get it when someone like Gabby has done way worse things than Susan since day one, has been horrible. I mean, for one, she slept with a teenager multiple times and was pursuing a relationship with him. Susan never did that. Carlos got hit in the eye and it made him go blind during a hurricane. Since then, when Gabby's with Carlos, she mistreats him so much because she can take advantage of the fact that he's blind and vulnerable. He's not in a position to defend himself as well because he can't see her. Watching her behave like that towards someone who's effectively disabled, it's just really nasty. And Susan's never pulled stunts like that. She wouldn't dare. So I'm just saying, the hate is very disproportionate when you compare her to the other women, at least in my experience so far. But the next girl I do want to talk about is Gabby, because I was literally just talking about her. I really enjoyed Gabby's storylines in season 4. She's so much more interesting than she was in season 1 and season 2. She starts being unhappy in her relationship with Victor in season 4 because she hates how he puts his political career above her. She's saying she just wants to be loved, to be treated like a princess. She did it with Carlos when he was off working and making loads of money when they were rich. She was annoyed that he wasn't home enough. And now when Victor's off trying to get money, she gets annoyed that he's not giving her attention all the time. She fights 2 men in wheelchairs because she wants their parking space, which was really uncomfortable. When Carlos goes blind after a hurricane, she makes it all about herself. I had to clean your toothbrush this morning. Do you know how much I've sacrificed for you? I have to do this, I have to do that. She starts fighting with the man who gave her a ticket because she thinks that as the mayor's wife, she should be able to get away with it. Then she tries to take advantage of Carlos's blindness when she gets back with him after separating from Victor by parking in all the handicapped spaces. Carlos decides to adopt a dog to help him with his blindness. Then Gabby doesn't like the dog, so tries to get rid of it without Carlos's permission. Obviously, I'm mentioning both Victor and Carlos, so it may be confusing as to which one she's with. But basically, she starts off season 4 in a relationship with Victor still, but cheating on him the whole time with Carlos. Then Gabby was paranoid that Victor would find out she cheated on him because he might do terrible things to her. They went on this boat trip together, and she was really worried that he was going to kill her or hurt her because he literally told her, hey, I know about you and Carlos. And she was like, wait, you know? How long have you known for? And they were on a boat alone, and she freaked out, and so she hit him with an oar and he fell into the water. And then she came back to save him. Carlos arrived too to help, and then Victor felt really annoyed that Carlos was there and he tried to fight Carlos. Gabrielle had to push Victor into the water again and he nearly drowned. Apparently all he wanted was to love her, but he doesn't really treat her that way, so it's confusing. But during the hurricane, once he's out of hospital, he pursues Carlos with with a gun, but then he gets impaled by a flying object and dies. And at the same time, Carlos is hit in the head with another flying object, and that's what makes him blind. Then Gabby gets back with Carlos officially and can marry him, and she's actually really happy to be with him again, despite the fact that he's blind. They realize they need money and they're having financial problems, so they rent out a section of their house. So this woman comes to live there, and she's called Ellie. Gabby starts suspecting that Ellie is sleeping with men for money because she's having weird men coming in and out of her room, and it's looking really dodgy. Another character I want to talk about is Edie. One of the things that really rubbed me the wrong way about Edie in season 4 and 3 is that they've really robbed her of her self-respect. She complicates things when she finds out about Carlos's illegal offshore bank account in the Cayman Islands. So she's trying to use that to threaten him as some sort of edge or way of him staying with her or blackmailing him into being with her. And then she tries to kiss Orson, and Bree is obviously furious, so she tries to sabotage Edie's real estate job. And rather than Edie reflecting and understanding, she tries to bite back at Bree by blackmailing her. And that was just one step too far. Like, that was ridiculous. Bree tells her friends what's going on and that she's being blackmailed with this fake pregnancy, and that's the first time she tells the girls that she was never actually pregnant. So the girls go to Edie and they say that they're done with her. This is the final straw and they will no longer associate with her. And then Edie has the nerve to actually be upset and shocked that they don't want to be her friends. Even when she'd blackmailed Bree, her terms were that Bree invited her to events with her friends if Bree treated her like a friend. Those were her terms and conditions. It's actually really heartbreaking because she just wants friends so badly and to be included, but yet she doesn't know how because she goes about it always in the wrong way. If you're going around blackmailing people, how will you ever expect them to like you? Now let's talk about Bree. Bree's interesting because she was freaking unreal in season 2 and 3, but then in season 4 I felt like she took a bit of a step back from the limelight, and she was still a great character, but because I'm just almost vlogging my experiences of the show as I go along, my feelings will keep changing, but she's definitely not my favorite now. One of Bree's major storylines in season 4 was her trying to hide her fake pregnancy from her neighbors because she doesn't want anyone to know that her daughter was the one who was pregnant. I guess because she finds that stuff shameful because her daughter Danielle wasn't actually married when she had sex. But it was very, very funny to see Bree walking around with this massive fake baby bump pretending to be pregnant, and it put her in a lot of awkward situations. They're at a barbecue and there's this big sharp fork used and it slices right into Bree's stomach and punctures it, and she's just walking around with this knife effectively sticking out of her stomach, not realizing. I nearly actually peed myself laughing, but Bree is happy to raise this baby and pretend it's her own because she wants it to be like a parenting do-over for herself, and she is really worried about her daughter Danielle not being the best mum, so she feels like she should take care of the baby. Now, as lovely as that is, I felt like it was extremely selfish, and that's why I'm saying that Susan isn't the only selfish character in the show, you know, to cut Susan some slack. I mean, seriously, Bree's excuse is, I deserve a parenting do-over. Danielle would be a terrible mother anyway, she's too young, she needs to go to uni, I need to look after the baby, without actually asking Danielle what she wanted, or considering the fact that maybe Danielle would want to be a mum. It's not about you, Bree. I don't care how much you want a parenting do-over. It's not your child. And I felt like she was sort of taking ownership already of Danielle's unborn baby, forgetting that she has 2 other kids, Andrew and Danielle, who need her. And I don't care if she feels like she made some mistakes parenting them. She's pushing them away by acting as if she's ashamed of them, to the point that Andrew wants to move out because he feels like she just doesn't love him. Also, what bothers me is this show is weirdly pro-life. They don't even use the word abortion in the show, and no one like mentions the possibility that they don't have to keep the baby. Like, what's up with that? Is there a reason for that? I don't get it. When Gabby got pregnant in season 1, forcibly impregnated, might I add, because she didn't want the baby, she was like, okay, I guess I'm pregnant, so I'll go with it. Then when the baby comes along in season 4, Bree really wants the child to be circumcised. What bothered me is that Orson had a really traumatic history with being circumcised himself as a child, and he also had some strong views in it about lack of sexual pleasure for the man once they have it, and he was really against their child Benjamin having it when Benjamin's born. And yet Bree just goes ahead and has the child circumcised without Orson's permission. And the worst part is, because Orson's such a doormat when it comes to Bree, he forgave her in about 2 minutes and he didn't even yell at her. How can you be so forgiving? She went behind your back and made this huge decision. What the hell? Also, Bree can be really hurtful when she wants to be. Like, she knows where to stick the knife. When her and Orson are arguing, if she ever really wants to hurt him, she'll make some comment about Benjamin not actually being his biological kid anyway. And so Bree knows how much it will hurt to remind him, oh, actually, it's not really your kid, is it? Which I also thought was really mean. She kept insisting that Orson turned himself into the police for trying to kill Mike. I'll love you, but only if you turn yourself in. Bree's done illegal stuff before. She didn't turn herself in, so I don't know why she's taken the moral high ground. I mean, she broke and entered into Catherine's house to steal a recipe, and when she sat and watched George die in season 2, she never turned herself in for that. And he'd spend years in jail potentially. Would you really want your kids to not have a father because he's in jail? Mike is the one that should be asked about this. Mike had forgiven Orson. Mike was cool with it. So why are you getting angry on Mike's behalf about something that's got nothing to do with you? Like, what? The final girl I want to talk about is Lynette. And this may shock you guys, but she was my favorite character in season 4. This is Lynette I'm talking about, who was always one of my least favorites. As soon as she got cancer, she had a really big perspective shift and she started being more grateful and present with her kids and appreciative of what she did have. And she gets into survivor's guilt a lot, questioning the meaning of life and why she got to live and other people didn't. They also address Kayla, who lost her mum in the previous season. And Kayla is a very manipulative child. Even before her mother was shot, she was always messed up. She's a very abnormal child. She's manipulative, she turns people against each other, doesn't form normal emotional attachments. Psychologists or social workers kept trying to make out that it was somehow Lynette's fault for not loving Kayla enough. Kayla's formative years were not with Lynette. She spent them with her mum Nora for like the first 7 years of her life, which is when your subconscious is developed and everything and your core beliefs are formed. Whenever anything goes wrong, it's like everyone blames Lynette, and that's just not true. Lynette's trying to explain it to Tom and he's not listening to her and he's taking Kayla's side. He doesn't listen properly when Lynette tries to talk to him about things. He's just the worst husband ever. Like, seriously. So I was really glad when he finally came to his senses and actually realized, although I don't remember him apologizing to Lynette. He really should have. The final thing I want to talk about from season 4 is the mystery plot, because as amazing as season 4 was, unfortunately, the finale and the mystery was the reason why I can only give it like a 4 out of 5 rather than a 5 out of 5 star rating. Catherine has a lot of secrets to do with her ex-husband. She never talks about him and she won't tell Dylan anything about her biological father. Dylan has a lot of memory loss issues from her childhood. She apparently used to live there on the street and apparently used to be best friends with Julie. And Julie has all these memories and photos of them together and Dylan's just not remembering any of it. Julie feels like Dylan's not just got some memory loss issues, she is a different child altogether. It's as if she's been replaced with a new kid. And that's when I was pretty much certain that Dylan wasn't actually Dylan, that maybe the original Dylan had died and was replaced. And it was kind of sad that I guessed the plot twist in like the first episode, because that's what ends up happening. It's so compelling. Why has she been replaced? Does Dylan have amnesia from trauma, or is she actually not Dylan at all? So many questions and intrigue and suspicion around Catherine, and when you get the answers, it's not half as fulfilling as you would think it would be, considering how masterfully they set it up. Julie and Dylan break into Dylan's old room where Dylan used to sleep when they first lived on Wisteria Lane. And when Catherine catches them, she's furious, which makes her seem guilty, right? Like she's hiding something, like she's done something bad. It makes it sound as if Catherine killed the original Dylan on purpose or something and replaced her with a new child. What she did wasn't half as bad as I thought it would be, or as much as the show was making it out to be. There's also this really pointless storyline where we found out that Catherine slept with Susan's cousin when he was 16 and took his virginity. Catherine was judging Gabby for sleeping with John, the underage gardener, and saying, how dare you, you're a predator. But Catherine did the exact same thing. Who is she to talk? That makes no sense. Catherine's ex-husband arrives, who Dylan's never really talked to for years, and he starts trying to connect with Dylan and pretending he cares about her. His questioning if Dylan is even his or not, like if Catherine cheated on him or what the deal is. Right towards the end of the season, we're treated to a flashback, and it's Catherine's flashback. We see her sitting in the police station talking to an officer, and Catherine's covered in bruises. The policewoman rifles through papers and realizes that Catherine's husband is Wayne Davis, one of their patrolmen. And the policewoman says, your husband's a police officer, he's got a lot of friends around here. Of course you could press charges, but I can't guarantee that one of his friends won't lose the paperwork again. Get as much money as you can and grab your daughter and run. And that's why she went to Wisteria Lane the first time, because she was escaping from her husband. So it was just her and her child moving in. And then her child, Dylan, started to form a friendship with Julie and they were getting along. A few months passed and she convinced herself that her husband had forgotten about her. And then one day Mary Alice, who was actually babysitting her daughter, said that this strange man had turned up at the house, and so she ends up taking her daughter and running out of Wisteria Lane in a rush. Catherine works as a villain to be shady and bitchy and conniving. And then we find out she's just a victim of a horrible husband. And she made one big mistake, sure, but like it was nothing compared to what Wayne did. Yet we spent so much time setting her up as a villain. A wardrobe fell on her daughter and crushed her. It had nothing to do with the main plot. Her daughter was just killed and it was a complete accident. And she knew that Wayne really wanted to have a relationship with his daughter and take her away. So she was worried about him being angry or something. Why feel the need to lie and then get a girl from an orphanage and call her Dylan and replace your dead child with a new child? Why would you be so secretive about where Dylan came from? Why couldn't you just give her a new name, adopt a new child? Why do you need to pretend she's Dylan? That doesn't make sense. Why couldn't she have just told Dylan the truth about who she was rather than brainwashing her and lying to her and pretending to be her real mum? Why couldn't she have told Dylan more information about her abusive ex-husband so Dylan could understand why Catherine was trying to keep her away from him rather than acting like a total cow whenever Dylan brings him up? Why does she keep making herself look guilty throughout the entire series? And why gaslight your daughter and brainwash her? Why would you do that? There's no motive. There's no reason to go that far. It doesn't make sense. If you're so confident your husband will never be able to track you down again, then why keep up this lie, pretending you've got your daughter alive still? And how does Dylan have no memories of her childhood? Surely she'd remember being in the orphanage. I don't know what I was expecting, but something better than the answers I got. The worst thing about the finale is the final 3 minutes, which left a sour taste in my mouth and I felt like it was really poorly done. After Catherine kills her ex-husband when he comes back to attack her, and she tells Dylan the truth finally about who she is, and the whole season wraps up beautifully, we get a time jump 5 years into the future. It's a very rushed 3 minutes, quickly jumping between each of the girls to show where they're at and what they're up to, looking completely different in different relationships or doing different things with their kids older, and we're just meant to process this huge info dump. It's hard to connect them to the characters we've just seen. I have no issue with a time jump. If they want to do a time jump 5 years into the future, be my guest. I think it's a great idea. I really think they could have given us like a solid 10 minutes on each character showing where they're at before they randomly skip and go into the next one, because they really threw us into the deep end there, and I would have appreciated it if they just slowed it down. Now, I know it sounds negative. I'm just saying that it disappointed me. I actually really loved season 3 and 4, and it's probably one of my favorite shows. So it might sound like I'm nitpicking, and I am. Overall, as a whole, this show is really amazing and really juicy, and the characters are compelling, and I would still really 10 out of 10 recommend you watch it, and I cannot wait to watch more. The ideas they come up with are amazing. I don't know how you can have the creativity to come up with so many unique ideas, but I definitely think this was like the golden era of the show for sure. Like, I don't see how it can get much better than season 3 and 4, because every episode was so juicy. And even when the mystery let me down in season 4, I found that I didn't really care that much because it was so enjoyable to watch anyway, you know? Desperate Housewives season 5 was definitely one of the stronger seasons. This is probably my favorite season after season 3 because of how different it was. It was just super refreshing. It's so good, like genuinely. I've never laughed aloud so much watching a show in a long time. And I just want to show you my outfit today because it's really cute. So I've got this really pretty flowery top and then this silky skirt. It's really cute actually. I do like it. So season 5 of Desperate Housewives was really interesting because because we experienced a time jump into the future, which I didn't like at first because I found it very rushed and clumsy, but I've settled into it now, so it's fine. Here are some of the main plot points. Bree becomes the driving force behind a successful catering company and releasing her own book with her cooking secrets that actually is really successful. But this results in her being a bit arrogant at points, so it creates a rift in her relationships. And Terry Hatcher, who plays Susan, said that the new fashion, style and looks for all the women reflect how they've changed now. Lynette deals with her husband going through a midlife crisis, rebellious children and financial issues that take a toll on her. As for Susan, she's now divorced from Mike. How many times can these guys break up, for God's sake? And she's having this friends with benefits situation with a guy called Jackson, even though she really still wants Mike. Then Catherine, her friend, becomes romantically involved with Mike. Yeah. Her personality also completely changes and she becomes this very sweet, nice, nurturing woman. Even though when she was introduced in season 4, like I said, she's trying to be queen bee and top dog and she's being very intense and manipulative, and now she's just behaving like a woman that only wants to be loved and is really vulnerable, and it was very weird, like this drastic shift in personality. As for Gabby, she becomes the mum of 2 bratty girls and her husband Carlos is blind, so she's got to deal with taking care of him. And then he gets his sight back and goes back into work, and she has to deal with remembering how their relationship used to be when he was working all the time and wasn't emotionally available to her, which is what caused so many struggles for them in season 1. And since that pattern starts to happen again in season 5, it kind of freaks her out. But the mystery is what I want to talk about first before I break down each of the women and what happens to them. Edie, the outcasted girl, returns to town with a new husband in tow who the other women have never met before, and he's called Dave, and he is the main villain and mystery of this season, and he is an excellent villain. I mean, he's not perfect, but he's entertaining, he's scheming, and he has a revenge agenda against Mike and Susan. They did something bad that affected him personally, and it was a very upsetting backstory, so he wants revenge on them. The only person who starts cluing on to his weirdness is Mrs. McCluskey. Mike does at points, but Mrs. McCluskey is really on it. So there's this hilarious subplot where she hires her sister, and they're almost like these detectives doing this background work on Dave and trying to figure out what's wrong with him. We know that Dave came from a hospital for the criminally insane, and this doctor who used to help him comes to Wisteria Lane and asks Dave, "What are you doing here?" And then Dave kills him and covers up the body and sets this whole club on fire so that no one will find out. And then Dave saves Mike in the fire and pretends to be this hero, even though he was the one that set the fire in the first place. And in the season finale, it accumulates with Dave trying to kill Susan's son, and then luckily he backs out at the last minute, and so it's not half as bad as it could have been. The kid's fine. At the end, Mrs. McCluskey and Roberta had coincidentally teamed up with the detectives because they had information, and they together realized the true identity of David, and it was honestly a very juicy mystery. The only thing that made me a bit sad is the fact that Dave was so obviously suspicious, and the whole season we know, and it's made very clear that he hates Mike and Susan. It kind of takes the intrigue out of it because we know exactly what he's planning and what he wants to do. So I wish they could have made it a bit less obvious perhaps, or not revealed his intentions until maybe halfway through the season, because from the minute he arrived, it was made obvious that he had bad intent. The first character I want to talk about is Susan, because I know she's the housewife who tends to get the most criticism and controversy. Susan and Mike divorced after a car crash that really tore their relationship apart because they kept having arguments about it. Susan, as we know, likes to really ruminate over issues rather than moving on, so I could totally understand why that would cause a divorce, so at least that made sense to me. They do have a kid together though, so that makes it complicated because they still need to co-parent, even when she moves on and is dating Jackson, and when he moves on and starts dating Catherine, I'll get into that later, they sort of have to negotiate there being multiple mother and father figures in their son MJ's life. MJ is adorable, by the way, shout out to the actor, he's so cute. Jackson really wants to take things to the next level with Susan, but she's still keeping him at a distance because she's worried about getting hurt again. Susan is really jealous when she finds out that Mike bought Catherine these expensive, well, seemingly expensive pearls. She assumes they were expensive, and yet he apparently can't afford to send MJ to private school, and for some reason it's really important to Susan that MJ goes to private school. She ends up breaking into Catherine's house to steal the pearls, and then it results in this very embarrassing scenario where Mike's forced to admit that the pearls were very cheap and he couldn't afford them to be new. What complicates it is that Susan still likes Mike, and Catherine can tell that Mike may still like Susan, and so there's this resentment there that Catherine has for Susan that really significantly damages their friendship. One thing I find weird is that Susan was never going to be consoled by her daughter Julie or ask Julie for advice. I know that Julie's off at uni at this point in this season because of the time jump or working or something, but it's so strange to me that she wouldn't be calling her daughter constantly and asking her for advice, because in the earlier seasons of the show, Susan had such a codependent relationship with her daughter. She was always asking her for advice, always saying, please, how can you help me? And now she's basically figuring everything out on her own, which I just don't think is very characteristic of Susan. Even though Susan had her issues in season 5, I really liked her in about the first 6 episodes. I thought she was super sweet and hilarious. I definitely find her the funniest out of all the women. She's being really sweet trying to protect her son when he's being bullied, and she really does try her best to accommodate some kind of relationship between Jackson and Mike. And even though I didn't like Susan's personality as season 5 went on, I thought it had a really strong start. And also she just has this drunk energy that I find so funny. Like at the nightclub before the fire started, she was dancing around like this, just so weird. I was like, what are you doing? Like, when you look at her in the background of scenes, she always looks drunk and she's just such a mood. But her behavior with Jackson did start to get on my nerves a bit, because she was acting as if she didn't want him, but then got annoyed when he ended up moving on, and then she called the girl he was starting to date a slut. But how can you say that when you didn't want him? Like, you rejected him. Catherine started dating Mike. Now, I don't understand how that happened, because it was very rushed and they had no chemistry and started dating after like 1 episode, so that's bad writing. But if you look past that, Catherine and Mike, regardless of whether it's stupid or not, were dating. Susan really started to get on my nerves in season 5. The first incident was when she was irritated that Catherine and her son MJ were bonding. Catherine was doing a great job looking after him. Jackson was in the house all the time around MJ, and he was basically a complete stranger to Mike, and Mike was okay with it. So I don't see why Susan has a right about getting annoyed, especially because she knows Catherine, has known her for years. She should be comfortable letting Catherine spend time around her kid, you know? At one point, Susan was even considering moving away to live with Jackson and taking MJ with her. And it's not like she'd thought about how that would impact Catherine and Mike, so she's just really selfish. Another thing that bothers me the more I think about it is the car crash that caused the rift in her relationship between her and Mike, because she was the one that was driving the car, and yet she let Mike take the fall for it. He's already been in jail before. That's another thing to add onto his criminal record. And there was a flashback that showed Susan and Mike in the process of divorcing, signing the papers, and then she suddenly says to him, wait, are we making a mistake? That is not the time to be saying that. You should have brought up those feelings earlier, and now you're wasting his time and the lawyer's time just as you're about to sign the papers. Like, couldn't you have thought that through? Why is she only realizing this now? They'd already been separated for like a year. They're finalizing it, and now again she's saying, oh, but maybe we shouldn't. Like, she's really childish and indecisive. And don't even get me started on the whole private school thing with her son MJ. He's like 9 or 10. He's so small. He does not need to be at a private school when he's being taught the most elementary of things, like 1 + 1 = 2. You could literally homeschool him and teach him stuff really well. Now, I understand if he was 13, you don't want him at a public school, you want him at a private school, because maybe there's a higher level of education there, or you're worried that the classrooms are too big in a public school. But honestly, when he's this young, it seems a bit ridiculous to be so set on sending him to this fancy school, especially when you literally can't afford it. She keeps demanding that Mike works harder, which is so dumb, because she doesn't have that many skills herself and she doesn't work that hard, and it's not just Mike's responsibility to make money. money. She was basically living off child support because she doesn't make enough money from her job. He works so much that sometimes he needed Catherine to look after MJ because he has so little time. Where it really hit the nail on the coffin for me that I was annoyed at her was how the whole love triangle thing happened between her and Catherine and Mike. I really hated this storyline, and I felt like it was probably the worst subplot in all of season 5. Susan got over her initial weirdness about them dating, and she said that she was okay with it to Catherine, like, go for it, I don't want Mike anymore. Then, even though she said that, when she realizes that she does indeed like Mike, she keeps trying to say that she likes him and flirt with him a bit, even though she knows that he's with Catherine. I don't have a huge problem with Catherine and Mike getting together. It is weird because Catherine and Susan are friends, but Susan's in a new relationship now and she's divorced from Mike. And everyone dates everyone. Bree starts dating Carl, Susan's ex-husband in season 5. So that's kind of how the show works, to be honest. And it doesn't help that Mike really led Catherine on, and it was like he just wanted some sex, but he wasn't actually taking her that seriously to be his second backup option in case Susan didn't want him. He was proposing to her and telling her he loved her, but then right in the finale, he drops her immediately to be with Susan. Susan was such a child in that situation though, because she acted like Catherine had stolen Mike from her. Their relationship will fail if you keep getting in the way and sabotaging it like this. She was angry that Bree didn't tell her that Catherine and Mike were dating. She convinced MJ to hate Catherine. I do think though that because Susan is so dumb, yes, she's selfish, but she doesn't think it through. Like, I think she's too stupid genuinely to have the capacity to emotionally manipulate someone. She's not really the scheming type. Whereas Mike should have known better in this situation. Catherine said she was thinking of moving away, and then Mike said to her, no, please stay. Why tell her to stay if you're not going to take her seriously? And the dumbest thing about this whole love triangle is that when it doesn't work out with Mike, Catherine is angry at Susan. The only person she should really blame here is Mike for leading her on and not communicating with her or thinking stuff through. She literally turned Susan into the other woman or the homewrecker and then put Mike on this pedestal, and because I've seen season 6, and then spends all of season 6 trying to get him back. The next character I want to talk about is Edie, who's just such an iconic character. She comes back to Wisteria Lane and has this idea in her head that the ladies should have thrown her a we're sorry party, which I think shows a real lack of awareness, because why would they do that when you were so rude to them? You're as much in the wrong as they are. And then when she criticizes their flaws, she's doing the exact same thing herself. So yeah, she's not my favorite character by far, but I still think that she's way better than a lot of the other characters. I had issues with her in the earlier seasons, but in season 5 she was amazing. Just the perfect balance of snarky and witty without being a bore or stressful to watch. Causing drama but in a fun way, and I thought she was absolutely shining in season 5. She seems really happy now she's not with Carlos anymore, and that she's apparently happily married to Dave, this mystery man. The way the show starts to treat her is the biggest giveaway that the show is from the early 2000s, more specifically, because this show sends this message that you can be a kleptomaniac, a diva, a cheater, just don't be slutty. The girls are still ignoring her and not including her. When she experiences a breakup from Dave, the girls don't even really spend much time on it, and then they go and hug Susan about something and forget all about Edie. And then they kill her off really brutally, which I felt came out of nowhere. Considering what a major character she is, I was like, whoa. There's this cheeky voiceover she's doing, which really takes away from the emotional impact of her death and almost makes it funny. The other women see her die, but they don't actually cry, and then they spend most of the time after that around her funeral making fun of her and cracking jokes at her expense. They say they should scatter her ashes where she lost her virginity, and then they joke about her plastic surgery and her fake boobs and the amount of guys she slept with, which just leaves a really sour taste in my mouth. Then there's this stupid add-on episode dedicated to explaining how Edie came into their lives and influenced all of them in a really beneficial way, and the various nice conversations they had in heart to heart. It's like they're adding in all this stuff as an afterthought, but those things were never there to begin with. Suddenly they're making out as if they actually were all friends with her, which never happened. We find out that Gabby and Edie apparently went drinking like friends do together. Since when? That Edie was hanging out with Susan and going jogging with her. Again, since when. I did really like Edie's dynamic with her husband, and I'm glad that at least we got to see her married, but it made me really sad that the last thing that happened before she died was realizing that Dave wasn't who he claimed to be and that he was a bad guy. The next character I want to talk about is Gabby. She thinks her daughter is too fat and she doesn't know what to do about it, and it makes her reflect upon her own weight gain over the years and how she's not really putting herself together like she used to in terms of her makeup and her hair. And because Carlos is blind, he would have to delegate a lot of tasks to her and cooking, so she has less time to work out, less time to look after herself. And because he's blind, she's hardly motivated to look good because he can't see her. Also, she wants Carlos to get a job as a masseur at a local country club, but then she realizes that because this isn't the most high-flying job, that they're actually losing their social standing and they're not being invited to the same fancy parties, which obviously really hits her ego. And Carlos at this point has gone through more of his transformation to being a better person, so he feels like the most important thing is family and that all that money was bad for him, but Gabby actually doesn't feel the same way and she wants to be successful and admired. Finally, Gabby is annoyed because a member of Carlos's family is sick and can't look after their daughter, so that means that they're going to need to adopt Carlos's niece. She's this teenage girl called Anna who's really troubled and she's just going to cause a lot of problems, and Gabby isn't that keen at the idea of taking her on. I do feel like Gabby has definitely experienced some character development, which was really cool. For example, there was this crazy old rich lady who wanted Gabby to be put in her will and to share a lot of money with her as long as her daughters would basically live under her thumb and if she sent them to private school and controlled their lives. And the old Gabby would have jumped at the opportunity to get that much money, but the new Gabby was like, oh, actually I don't want to do that because I don't want you to have control over me and my daughters like that. She has some respect for herself and she understands that some things are more important than money. As I mentioned earlier, Gabby has gained some weight and she still looks great by the way, I think, but she's also wearing these really frumpy clothes that are extremely unflattering. I don't know who wears clothes like that. She's basically wearing a tablecloth. What bothers me is her losing her sense of style. I understand not having time to do makeup or exercise or eat well, but really, like, her fashion was so bad. That doesn't make sense. She could still wear nice clothes even though she has less money. That's okay. I have bought so many clothes cheap secondhand, or if you go to like a marketplace or a garage sale, you can get loads of nice clothes that people are chucking away, or you can get stuff from like fast fashion places and things like that where they are just very cheap clothes, but they can still look neat and classy. She could have bought drugstore makeup if she couldn't buy super expensive stuff. I have a lot of drugstore makeup and it works just fine for me, so I don't believe that she would lose that much of her sense of style, even if she is struggling financially, even if she is tired. If anything, they could have put her in leggings and a t-shirt or in a cute little camisole like what Susan wears, and that would be absolutely fine as well. Another thing that bothers me is the fact that she actually ended up having kids when she didn't want them, nor did she ever want them. Wouldn't it be nice to have one of the main women just stay childless? Like, why is motherhood always forced on women when they don't want it? Like, what is wrong with society? If she doesn't want kids, that's cool. Also, she is genuinely concerned about her daughter's weight. Both their daughters' weight, actually. She tried to talk to Carlos about her concerns involving this, and I felt like he wasn't a very good husband because regardless of whether he agreed or not about their kid's weight, it's like he wasn't hearing her. You can't apply beauty standards to a child. I'm just saying that if Gabby is worried that her child is medically obese, then maybe that's something Carlos should listen to her about. When Gabby had to coach children for beauty pageants in an earlier season, she was judgmental towards any of the girls who signed up who weren't like a size 0, like very thin. And she was talking about a lot of disordered eating and unhealthy approaches to food and a real emphasis on restriction, and you can't eat this and you can't eat that. And it's basically all she does. And she notices if she gains weight. She doesn't just become oblivious to it. So I think it's odd that the first time that she started thinking about her daughter's weight was when she overheard other women commenting on their weight, saying that she was a bad mum and that she was negligent. And then she was like, what? And then that's when she properly looked at her daughters. But I was thinking, surely if it bothered you, you would have noticed it earlier. because you were a model and you were so obsessed with that stuff. Like, that's weird to me. Also, I don't like the way her daughters are written. The youngest one never talks ever. She says nothing. And the older one is so rude. Like, all she does is shovel food in her mouth, or she's just being nasty. And I get that she's a diva because of course she'd be like her mum, but I just don't like her scenes or her sister's scenes. Like, they're such annoying daughters. 90% of their scenes revolve around the women commenting on their weight and making fun of their weight, or there being some kind of problem with what they're eating, and like that's all their characters are made out of. Like, your entire personality is not being hot or being fat or being skinny or being whatever. Like, that's bizarre. You're so much more than just your looks. Okay, discuss it in one episode, fine, but it's mentioned like every time the girls are on screen. Even in later seasons, it's still being brought up. I think in season 7, Brie accidentally hits Juanita with her car. And then she says to Gabby, "I'm so sorry I hit your daughter. I genuinely didn't see her coming." And Gabby's like, "She's my daughter. Trust me, everyone sees her coming," because it's another implication like, oh, she's so fat you can't miss her, and it's constant. Look, I'm all for being healthy. I'm all for taking care of your body, or maybe making kids lose weight if you're concerned that they're not eating well or whatever, okay? Because every scene I see of the girls, they're eating a lot of ice cream. But if that's the case, do it respectfully. When it's worked into every second sentence, it seems a bit much, and it's totally played for comedy. And again, that's quite an early 2000s thing, like the fat funny girl, because nowadays, I hope that we can outgrow that and realize that the fat girl doesn't need to be like the funny one. It's just not very nice. It's not nice when a show opts for cheap fat jokes, in the same way that it would make me very uncomfortable if a show was constantly skinny shaming someone or calling them too thin. Moving on from that, another issue I had with Gabrielle's storylines is that she's concerned that she might be pregnant. I think it was in a flashback, because Carlos lied to her and told her that he got a vasectomy when he didn't. And he'd also been reluctant to wear a condom. I can't believe that that's in a show and that's a normalized conversation. She should have divorced him then and there. That alone is a lack of respect for her boundaries and her body. Sure, he apologized and said he felt guilty about it, but why was that even in the storyline? The next girl I want to talk about is Brie. Brie and Catherine now run their successful catering company. Andrew also works for them, which I love. Such a great decision. Like, that's such a cool idea. I love Andrew, by the way. He's probably my favorite character. Brie is about to publish her own cookbook, but Catherine feels like she deserves more credit because a lot of the recipes in there are hers, or variations of her stuff she came up with. Danielle had forcefully taken her son Benjamin from Brie years ago when she got married, and Brie's still upset about this because she kind of felt like Benjamin was her kid even though he's her grandson, and so that's really hard because there's this rift in her relationship with her daughter, so they don't see each other that often, and it means that she doesn't get to see Benjamin that often either. Meanwhile, Brie finds out that her son Andrew is dating this guy called Alex, and she invites him for dinner and everything, and it's really weird because Andrew and Alex seem really happy, but then their relationship just disappears in the next season as if nothing happened, and we don't even get to see a breakup scene. Finally, Brie and Carl start dating when she realizes that she needs to divorce Orson. I know, so sad. I went on and on about how much I like Brie and Orson, but now they're divorcing due to multiple reasons, which is so stupid, I'm going to get into in a minute. And it was probably one of the worst parts of season 5. And I do think she's a bit overrated, even though I really loved her in seasons 2 and 3, and I went on and on and on about her. I feel like those seasons were her time to shine, but now not so much. Brie discovers Andrew's dating their Dr. Alex, like I mentioned, and Alex and Andrew were keeping their relationship pretty private and they hadn't told her about it, yet she feels entitled to know everything, even though she'd been so rude about Andrew being gay. I don't know why she would think that he would tell her anything. Brie thinks then that she can dictate when she gets to meet Alex and that he'll come around for dinner when she says so on her terms, which is really selfish and controlling, especially because it would make so much more sense if she just allowed Andrew to introduce his boyfriend when he feels ready, rather than forcing him into doing something he clearly doesn't want to do. I don't know why everyone goes on and on about Susan being selfish, because Brie is so selfish as well. Like, none of these housewives are particularly good people. What Brie did to Orson was one of the worst things that any woman on the show has done to their partners, like, ever. She sent him off to prison, right? To make sure that he'd be punished for hitting Mike with his car. She sends him off off. Oh my God. She's annoyed then when guys at the dinner table are making prison jokes because she's acting as if it's some sort of summer camp for him to reflect and grow. And I'm like, Brie, babes, this isn't a summer camp. This is prison. It's not going to be like a meditation class where he heals and learns from his mistakes. You're sending him into a very dangerous environment that will give him a criminal record. Then when he goes to prison, she cries in the corner. And I was like, are you actually kidding me? That's so pathetic. You sent him there. Another thing that I don't get, Brie has this new job, a cookbook. She's plagiarized Catherine's freaking recipes and she's not apologizing for it and then making money and fame off stuff that 50% isn't actually her stuff, and she hasn't even credited Catherine as coming up with it. And then Catherine's reporting to her as like a subordinate or assistant, which makes no freaking sense when you consider their previous dynamic where Catherine was top dog and always wanted to have one over Brie. Why on earth would she be reporting to her now, and why have they changed her entire personality? I never liked Catherine in season 4, but what I respected about her was that she was a badass and she would not take no for an answer, and she was no one's pushover. When Brie started drinking again, when Orson went back to prison, Catherine was there for her. She moved in with her to take care of her. She was so kind. But then when Catherine needed her, and later on when Catherine and Mike were broken up and Catherine was devastated, where was Brie? She failed her. Brie also annoys me because she patronizes Orson when they're still married, and she constantly talks down to him as if he's a child and as if he's inferior to her in some way, and he's like this puppy dog desperate for her attention. She insults him in front of others, or she just does little things to insinuate that he's not good enough. And I didn't even notice that until Andrew's fiance Alex pointed it out, and then I thought about it and I was like, yeah, why does she do that? She really doesn't appreciate him. I really adored Brie in season 2 and 3, as I said, but now I still like her and everything, but she's by no means my favorite housewife. She really annoyed me. Her daughter comes by to visit with Benjamin, and Brie's acting as if she has some sort of right to Benjamin or to tell him what to do or how to parent him when he's not her kid. He's her grandson. Big difference. The whole point of the grandma is to be doting and give the kid cookies when the mum's not looking and not control what the kid does. That's weird. Because Brie sucks, her daughter Danielle never wants to be there. And then Brie is annoyed. But maybe if she just had a better relationship with her daughter, things would be fine. Benjamin is a lovely kid and Danielle has done an excellent job raising him. And so it really bothers me that Brie's acting like her daughter's failed in her parenting. She's annoyed that Benjamin's homeschooled, she's annoyed that he's a vegetarian, and then she does stuff behind Danielle's back to try and act like his mum. And the way Brie treated Orson, like I said, was the cherry on top of the cake. Brie forced Orson to go to prison for running down Mike, which is so dumb because Mike did not die as a result of the accident. He knew about it and he forgave Orson, so why can't Brie? And when her son Andrew had killed someone in a hit and run, it was kept a secret until like season 7. So that's hypocrisy. That makes no sense. So she forces Orson to go to prison, right? And has a cry about it. She refuses to visit him. And we find out that Brie only started visiting him a bit in prison because Edie told her to. And when she gets there, she's like, ugh, it's so gross and creepy. It's unhygienic. She treats him poorly when he tries to work at her company. Then she cheats on him. Now, because of Orson's criminal record, he can't get a job and he's not respected anymore. And Brie has no empathy about how awful that is and how that would make him feel. And she's talking down to him like she's ashamed of him. Now, I need to talk about Orson for a bit because the way his character was written was so awful to me. He was always one of my favorite characters in the earlier seasons. I thought he was amazing. And now he is one of my least favorite in the whole show because of the way they've just assassinated his character and turned him into this villain when it's no longer authentic. In the earlier seasons, Orson was always the comedic relief, bringing out Brie's best sides, backing her up and just being her support system, and they were so stable and so good together for such a long time that the fact the show would just throw it all away really upsets me. In the same way it really upset me when they just threw away, let's say, Naomi and Max from 90210. It's that kind of vibe. Orson's character just becomes such a douche. Edie dies, right? And she hit like this pole and was electrocuted, but the reason it happened was because of Orson. He was running around at night with the balaclava on, and then Edie swerved to avoid him, right? And that was his fault. And yet he never seems to feel grief over the fact that he caused it in a way. Orson starts to become this villain, vindictive, nasty, and working against his wife. He seems so threatened by Bree's success, by the fact that she's independent, a career woman, which is so unattractive. Like, he was never sexist like that or disrespectful like that. Why is he doing that now? That's not him. I would understand if he, let's say, resented her for never visiting him in prison, or if he resented her for looking down on him or something, but it's not really that. He resents her because of her success and because of her business. She feels fulfilled and successful, and because he doesn't feel fulfilled and successful, he's annoyed at her. Bree doesn't want to sell her business, and Orson's like, you should sell it because I want to be the breadwinner and you just sit at home and bake stuff for me. And then Orson starts almost blackmailing her and threatening her, saying, I'm gonna start doing bad things. I'm gonna start stealing if you don't sell your business. I'm not gonna be able to help myself. And the stealing, we'll get into that in a minute, because he starts stealing. He becomes a kleptomaniac. You don't just become a kleptomaniac. One thing happens with Andrew that annoys him, and so he's like, I'm gonna steal Andrew's pen. I'm gonna steal this, I'm gonna steal that. Who does that? Who wakes up one morning and goes, I'm gonna be a kleptomaniac because I feel bad about my life at the moment. I'm gonna go steal some shit from my friends' houses. Why would you even think to do that? Why would that even cross your mind? I'm sorry I'm yelling. I'm sorry, I need to get some water and take a breather. I'm just so annoyed because it makes no sense. His stealing escalates so much to the point that he breaks into an old woman's house like an actual thief, and that's why he was wearing the balaclava. He makes this sexist comment about Bree being fit for a homemaker's role. He wants someone who makes him look good, who doesn't outshine him too much, who makes him feel like the man, not someone who intimidates him. He's constantly guilt-tripping and emotionally manipulating Bree and stealing even when he knows it upsets her. And then he says that he was stealing instead of talking to her about the relationship problems they were facing. Pressurizes her into making him dinner and the specific creme brulee he wants, even though she'll need to run to the store and grab ingredients and it's late at night, and he's like, I'll wait. Why? For what, Orson? For what? Bree says, would you really want me to sell a business that I spent years building, that makes me feel joy and a sense of accomplishment? And he says, yes. She should have literally divorced him then and there. That's unbelievable. I just wrote that down because when I heard that line, I was blown away. He then gets obsessed with the fact that she pays Andrew more than him, which is also dumb because Andrew's been there for longer, so of course Andrew would be paid more. And Orson was only hired after manipulating her into it, so of course he's not going to be paid loads. After he breaks into the old woman's house, he doesn't want her to report him, so he goes to the hospital and convinces the doctor that the old woman had dementia and that she's making up this story about him breaking into her house. I read an article where they'd interviewed the actor about his character, and he said he was initially written as a villain, and that explains why he had such insanely sinister vibes in season 3 and the end of season 2. But then they went down the happy marriage route with him and Bree, and he became a nice guy, and that was a decision they made. He said that he wanted to be a series regular, but he actually wanted a villain storyline because that's what he was originally hired for, and he thought he'd do a good job. So I guess that's what they're trying to do now, is turn him into a villain so he gets a chance to play that role. But that's dumb. It doesn't work. Sorry, babes. Bree never forgave Orson for hitting Mike with his car. She said she did, but she never really did, and their relationship was never the same after she found that out. She only took him back because Danielle took the baby Benjamin away, so she didn't want to be alone. But then when her business took off and she was successful, she completely forgot about Orson because she had another love, another passion to focus on, and she didn't feel so lonely anymore. But I don't think she ever really loved him after she found out about what he did, which I find really upsetting because people do all sorts of crazy stuff in this show. It's a soap opera, but I think for the writers to just give up on their relationship altogether is sad. And no matter who she dates, Carl, someone else, it won't be the same as how it was with her and Orson. The final character I want to talk about, the final housewife, is Lynette. Lynette's husband Tom is having a serious midlife crisis. He's wanting to do all sorts of crazy stuff he's never done before, and as a result, they're not really a partnership anymore. It's more just him going off and doing his own thing and annoying her, or it's him crying about how he's depressed and not successful, and her needing to constantly soothe him and rub his back and be like, oh baby, it's okay. No, you are amazing. You are successful. No, you're doing so well. I'm not even exaggerating, just soothing him. And he's another child, effectively. He's a burden. Tom comes up with a plan to replace his employees with his kids because they're having financial troubles, but his kids refuse to appreciate his work and how hard he tries, and so he has this seriously angry outburst and starts throwing his son around like this and shaking him by the shoulders. And it was very uncharacteristic for Tom to get violent like that. Lynette starts suspecting that he's maybe having an affair with Anne Schilling, Porter's friend's mother, but it's actually Porter, her teenage son, who's sleeping with Anne, who's a grown woman, like 45. Lynette uses her emergency fund, even though they're having financial issues, to bribe Anne into leaving town and never being in contact with Porter again. The woman, Anne, had basically faked a pregnancy in order to try and get Porter to stay with her. It was a very, very interesting storyline. Also, Porter is like targeted and framed for being the one that started the fire, even though Dave started it. Then at the end of the season, Lynette discovers that she may be pregnant, and there's a high chance that she'll give birth to twins again. I've thought a lot about Lynette's character so far, and although she has a lot of issues, I do think people are way too harsh on her. Like, she has so many great qualities that get overlooked. Considering how hard her job is, I don't blame her for being a bit highly strung. And my point is, I don't think she's any worse than any of the other housewives. They're all desperate housewives. They're all flawed, messy characters. Tom's midlife crisis was one of the most pathetic things I've ever seen. And I've tried to like him really hard. And now at this point when I'm recording season 5, I have to say, like, I just really hate his character. I think he's probably one of my least favorites in the whole show. And I just think he gets so many free passes because he's a guy, but she's the only one handling stuff like an adult rather than indulging in his childish fantasies about going off to Europe for a year in a van or whatever it was. A lot of their issues in their relationship end up being painted as Lynette's fault, even though it's both their faults. Tom was a loser in high school, and it's like now he's rewarding his teenage sons for breaking the rules and living out his fantasies from when he was a teenager. Lynette's the bad cop and Tom's the good cop when it comes to parenting their kids, and I think that's unfair that Lynette is the only one brave enough to properly discipline them. There's more statutory rape. I'm so bad at saying that. And it's this time Lynette's son Porter who's sleeping with his best friend's mum, who looks about 45, like I said, Anne. And that is her grooming him. And she's claiming they're in love, but they're not. It's literally a repeat of Gabby and John from season 1. But this time, apparently, we're meant to think it's horrible and not right, because why? Is it because the bad guy is a woman we don't really know, so it's okay to villainize her? But then why was it okay when Gabby did that? Like, is it because she's the main character? It's okay that she does it? But the way it was revealed was hilarious because Lynette thought that Tom was cheating on her with Anne. And so she told him, you know, I found out the truth. I know what's going on. And Tom was confused, and he thought that she meant that Porter was dating someone, and it was this miscommunication. So Lynette was like, I know what you know. I know the truth about everything. And Tom was like, oh, do you? I'm glad you found out eventually. And then he like starts laughing and whips out this can of beer saying, oh, what can I say? Boys will be boys. I can guarantee it's happened once and it'll happen again, because he thinks that he's talking about teenage boys pursuing relationships. And then that's even more like horrified because she thinks he's saying, yeah, boys will be boys. I cheated on you and I'll do it again. And she's like, oh, what did you just say to me? And it was absolutely hilarious. He realizes they're talking about two completely different things. And he's like, wait, what are you talking about? And it was so funny. But Tom's behavior in season 5, aside from that very funny scene, is really disgusting because he's always been a man-child, but somehow it's harder now to actually stomach it. Lynette was so understanding for the most part about his midlife crisis, aside from one thing where she was a bit unnecessarily snarky about him joining a band and she broke his freaking guitar, which was so toxic of her. But aside from that, she was pretty understanding and gentle with him when it came to his midlife crisis, even though it was pathetic and he was wallowing in his own misery for like the whole season. He was thinking of selling his pizzeria so he can travel for a year. He wants wants to get plastic surgery to look younger. He's saying what I wouldn't give to date a 17-year-old. But when he really crosses the line is how emasculated he becomes when it involves Lynette. He kept accusing her of keeping things from him and not giving him a chance to succeed when he failed at a job interview. And it was all on him, but he blamed her for it. He's intimidated by her power, her business success, her boldness, and so he starts moping and whinging when Lynette gets a business opportunity, even though it was a business opportunity that he turned down. And so when Lynette says, well, I'll do the job, he's like, what? No. And so he starts competing with her over it, like they're children. Then they do this challenge for 30 days of sex to try and bring them closer as a couple. And around 20 days in, Lynette can't do it anymore and she's literally so sleep deprived and she wants a break. But then Tom gets really annoyed and starts whinging and saying, please, please, as if he's a child. And he's actually annoyed at her that she didn't want to do it, like on the 20th day in, and then the next morning he refuses to make her pancakes or something as like this passive aggressive way of letting her know that he's displeased with her. And he'd even come into her work when she was working to try and make sure they had sex that day when she'd told him not to do that. It's sexual coercion. I don't care how long you've been together. You never have a right to someone's body or to assume that they would even want to do that with you. So yeah, I found that genuinely so annoying, and I think Lynette deserves better than him. I know she's got her issues. I know that sometimes she's rude to him, but I think one of the biggest reasons as to why she does that is because she's sick of his stupid, childish ideas. And so when he says stuff like, I feel like you don't listen to me, of course she doesn't listen to you. You're an idiot. Why would she listen to a thing you say? And so it makes me sad when people blame Lynette for stuff. Like a friend says you should be more compassionate towards Tom, or a relationship therapist says that she needs to be more compassionate, because it takes two to tango, and I don't think Lynette is solely responsible for him being an idiot. But you know, despite those things I talked about, I thoroughly enjoyed season 5. I thought it was so much fun. Like, I really enjoyed it. I thought the mystery was better than season 4's mystery overall, and yeah, I'm actually really excited for the final seasons and to talk to you guys about everything. To be honest, when I first started watching season 6, which I've just finished, the only parts of it that really resonated with me was the mystery involving the strangler and then the mystery of the new couple who'd moved in on the street. Anything mystery related basically. But in terms of just the general characters and what was going on in their lives, I found it boring or repetitive, or there were just various issues I came across, and I'm worried that as the show drags on and they keep adding more seasons, they may run out of ideas or lose sight of what made the show really good. Mrs. McCluskey is still hilarious, and their two new gay neighbors are also really funny. They're called Bob and Lee, and although they don't contribute anything immensely important to the show, they're still really funny and they're such good comedic relief. So I really like them. I really love Mrs. McCluskey. The first thing I want to discuss is the two mysteries, because that's what made season 6 stand out from the other seasons I've seen so far, because it had two mysteries rather than one, which added this extra layer of complexity and stuff to figure out that I really was appreciative of. Because in season 5, although it was great, there was only one mystery, and so at points it could feel a bit simplistic, a bit obvious, like, okay, there's not really that much going on here, there's not that much to keep up with. So that's what I'm going to start off with in this discussion. Before we get into it, I just want to let you know what I'm wearing on my face. The products will be listed in the description, and I've got these really cute feather earrings. So let's get into this review, which leads us to the introduction of Angie, the new housewife on the show, and someone who is a completely new breath of fresh air. Mark Cherry said that he wanted someone who had that blue collar vibe and not that typical suburban appearance. And so that's why the staff ultimately decided on Angie, an Italian New Yorker. The actress Drea did not know anything about the character's identity when she signed up for the role. She didn't know even the character's name or storyline, so she was a bit in the dark and worried about being typecast. But part of the deal when hiring her was that she only wanted to do one season of the show because she had a baby, and also she was eager eager to get back to New York. She's a smart talker and doesn't really match the vibes of the other more conservative housewives, which I thought was a really cool contrast to them. And so nice, especially when a lot of stuff was getting a bit slow and just not as interesting as it used to be. It was dragging on a bit, and every scene Angie was in, she made it really interesting. She can be quite blunt, at times tactless, but it comes from a place of being hurt in the past, so she's genuinely guarded and on the watch at all times for danger, and she will do anything to protect her family. You see scars on her back, and you know that her and her husband are running away from something, and they keep mentioning the FBI or police, so you know that maybe they were involved in something bad or they're hiding from something, but you don't know what. And it really was kept ambiguous for a lot of the show, which I also really liked because it was so mysterious. I was like, what is this couple's secret? Why is their son so weird? Angie hesitantly befriends the other women on the street, and her son Danny takes an instant liking to Julie, who's Susan's daughter. And then when Susan's daughter Julie gets strangled by some unknown assailant, luckily his alibi is validated, so Danny is cleared of all charges, but a lot of the other neighbors, especially Susan, are still suspicious of him, but he swore that he would never hurt Julie and that he genuinely cared about her. And you keep seeing reports of girls being strangled and killed, and one character we meet for a bit who starts dating Lynette's son Porter gets strangled. There's some dangerous person on the street, and that was such a scary and genuinely interesting subplot as well, and I liked that they were linked but also two unrelated things. But when you go back to this couple that's been introduced, Angie later learns that Nick had an affair and cheated on her with Julie, which is obviously really weird because it means that he had a relationship with Julie, and his son Danny was also interested in Julie and had romantic feelings for her. How old is Julie at this point? I think she's like 24, but Julie ends up realizing that her relationship with Nick wasn't good. She doesn't know if she can really trust him to be good to her, but at the same time she also rejects his son Danny, and when Danny is rejected he takes a bunch of pills and overdoses. Luckily he's okay, but when he wakes up in the hospital he is a bit disorientated, and he tells the nurse that his name is Tyler, which it's not, and then we realize they may be under some kind of witness relocation program, but it's not, because then Danny reveals his family's secret, and it's actually way more dark than that. And so he tells the nurse everything, and her name's Mona, and she decides to use it to her advantage to like blackmail the family, or she'll go to the police about it. She demands money from them in return for her silence, but before she can carry through with this plan, there's a plane that crashes into Wisteria Lane and it kills her, so she doesn't get the chance to, which is very convenient. It's like every season they do like 1 or 2 disaster episodes. Like in season 3 they had the supermarket shooting, and then they have a fire, and then they have an earthquake, now they have a plane crash. They're getting exceedingly insane. I've never seen a street face more like murders and tragedy. It's actually hilarious. I don't know why everyone's still in the street. Why does no one move out? Later, Angie and Nick's son Danny begins dating Anna. You may not know anything about Anna because I didn't really get to talk about her much in my last video, but Anna is the new adopted niece of Carlos and Gabrielle, and she's a teenager as well, so they're actually way more suited. And she was a bit wild and rebellious for a lot of season 6 and making a lot of bad decisions and sneaking out of the house, but she takes a genuine liking to Danny that I think was way more than just his hot. I mean, it was at first, but she genuinely was interested in him, and he thought she was really shallow, but then they started connecting and realized they actually kind of got along, and I thought they were so cute. I'm not joking. I thought these two were so freaking adorable, and so they ended up bonding. He had these ideas about who she was, and she was like, oh my god, can you at least give me a chance, because you have all these ideas about who I am and what I'm like, and you don't even know me. Carlos and Gabrielle were really bothered by it because they didn't want her having sex. Because Gabrielle and Carlos are concerned about this, they're going over to Angie and Nick's house to talk to them, and they overhear Angie and Nick fighting about this secret they have. And it was one of my favorite scenes in the whole show because Carlos and Gabrielle both have their ear pressed to the door, feeding each other muffins, like she's putting one in his mouth. It was so good. But after overhearing that conversation, they're concerned concerned about their niece's safety dating Nick and Angie's son. So they send Anna away to a modeling academy in New York to protect her. But then Danny goes to follow Anna and find her without his parents' knowledge. Gabby and Angie go to New York to follow them, and then Gabby says, hey, by the way, Angie, me and Carlos overheard some conversation, like, what's the deal? And so Angie opens up to her and tells her her big secret. She says that she got involved with a really bad guy called Patrick, who was an eco-terrorist, and she actually was really good at making bombs, and now she's on the run from him. The child Danny actually is his child. She's really worried that he'll try and take Danny back or something. It actually reminds me a lot of the abusive relationship dynamic between Catherine and her ex-husband in season 4, because it's this idea of a woman being hunted down by like a partner. But Patrick ends up tracking down Angie anyway towards the end of the season and in the finale. So he takes her hostage and tries to get her to make a bomb for him, and he's going to try and kill the son Danny and make her watch, and he's got this whole awful revenge plan. Luckily, Angie manages to outwit him in the best way, and Gabrielle, who'd actually been helping her and knew what was going on, ended up realizing that Angie was in danger because Angie left her a note, like an SOS. So it was a really juicy finale as well, and it wrapped up in a good way. I thought that it was a very interesting mystery. It wasn't my favorite though, because again, Angie lacked chemistry with the other women because we weren't seeing her on screen enough with them, and that's something some critics noted, that she was a bit too uninvolved with what was going on, similar to Betty Applewhite in season 2. Like, she was just too detached from them. And also her as an ex-eco-terrorist sounds a little bit ridiculous. I genuinely warmed to Angie's character, but not enough, and I think that's because, again, like so many other new characters, she's only there for a season and disappears, and because she didn't spend much time with the other women. I did like her a lot, but it's a shame she just left after one season. That happens a lot in this show. They build into something, they set up this great plot point, and then when they really could deliver, when they could properly milk it, they just forget about it and then get distracted by some new idea and then go down that route, and it's quite annoying actually. But now I want to talk about what each woman gets up to in this season and what I thought of their storylines. So I think we'll start off with Susan. The first episode of the 6th season airs, and so we get to see who Mike marries, whether it's Susan or whether it's Catherine, because in the finale of the last season, you know that he's marrying someone and you see someone under a veil, but it's kind of ambiguous as to who he chose. We're pretty sure it's Susan, but we're not like fully sure. But then in season 6, it opens with Mike and Susan getting married. It's like a flash forward to their wedding. But Mark Cherry told Entertainment Weekly that the bride's initial identity was actually going to be Catherine, and that Susan was the one that was going to be rejected and have a nervous breakdown after losing Mike. Then the viewers informed him that they would rather see Mike and Susan reconcile, and so he went along with that. And that's something that happens in a lot of shows that I feel like can't happen in movies so much, where the writers make a decision, or showrunners, they decide how something's going to be, they stick to it, and then they hear feedback from fans saying, we ship this couple, we want this, we want that, and so it actually ends up affecting the way they write the story. And sometimes it results in good decisions and doing what the people want, but other times it results in like less authentic storytelling decisions because they're too busy listening to what other people want. He said he didn't want to frustrate the fans too much and push them too much by keeping Mike and Susan apart for another year while Mike's married to another woman. And he said the fans were demanding it so loudly, he was scared of what would happen if he went against them, which was a wise decision, because if Mike and Catherine had gotten married, that's just creating too much angst and too much separation between him and Susan for sure. Cherry also added that since Catherine will be the one to suffer a nervous breakdown after losing Mike, it's going to be one of the funniest breakdowns you've ever seen. Yeah, funny isn't the first word that comes to mind. Now, this is a very funny show. I laugh all the time. It's one of the funniest shows I've watched in years, but Describing Catherine's breakdown as funny is just not in my vocabulary. I'm going to get into that later because I've got a lot to say about the way that Catherine's character was vandalized. But Susan is identified as Mike's bride in the premiere, and her marriage to Mike fully destroys her friendship with Catherine in a really significant way. I wasn't sure how those two were ever going to go back to being friends. After the wedding, Julie is strangled outside of Susan's home. She slips into a coma, and while awaiting for her daughter to awaken, Susan is going crazy, trying to speculate about who could possibly have done this to her daughter. She learns while Julie was in a coma that Julie had dropped out of medical school, that she was having an affair with a married man, Nick, and that she'd had a pregnancy scare before her attack, and all this stuff that Susan didn't know about her because she just always assumed that Julie was the perfect daughter. At one point, Susan starts to think that maybe Catherine strangled Julie because of the fact that Catherine is so bitter towards her and resentful, because Catherine is still continuing to pursue Mike, believing that he's in love with her. I'm all into speaking stuff into existence. I'm all into manifestation and everything, yes. But I mean, Catherine was properly role playing here. It's not like in her head she thought, maybe we'll get back together someday, I know that our connection was really strong. No, I don't mean it like that. She's going around and telling people, her neighbors, on phone calls with her daughter, me and Mike are so happy, isn't it amazing? And then going to Mike being like, I know you want me, kiss me, and all this, and forcing him, making him uncomfortable, and then he's like, oh my god, no. And she's like, I know you want me, I know you want me. Crazy. Honestly, it's giving desperate. It's giving I'm a needless void of attention. Mike warns her that he never truly loved her, and he gets brutal. He is like, I never loved you, Catherine. You were just a way to pass the time. The whole time I was with you, I was thinking about Susan. She was all that was on my mind. You're nothing to me. You were just some sex. That was it. He goes hard. He says, if you come near me and my family again, you'll regret it. And I read about a lot of people who are criticizing this, saying he's so disgusting, she's clearly vulnerable, and he's being so harsh. How could he say those things to her? He used her. I'm sorry, I disagree. I could not disagree more. It's not like he was just being rude to her willy-nilly, whenever. She was pushing him so hard. He tried to be nice, he tried to be respectful, he tried to avoid her. She wasn't getting the hint, and she was annoying him. And I think that he felt that the only way he could actually get the message to sink in would be to be really harsh with it, unfortunately, because I don't think she was going to listen unless he properly dragged her through the mud, unfortunately. She pushed him into doing that. I don't think he wanted to be cruel. After he leaves, after saying that, Catherine stabs herself. And keep in mind, this is after an entire season of trying to seduce him in the most ridiculous ways, saying, hey, I've got a plumbing emergency, can you come round? He comes around, and then she lays flowers all over the bed and roses and candles, and is trying to seduce him in lingerie. I'm talking crazy behavior, trying to kiss him when Susan isn't there, and then trying to manipulate Susan into feeling insecure about her relationship with Mike, and just attempt after attempt of patheticness. It was unbelievable. So she stabs herself with a knife that had Mike's fingerprints on it, and then she tries to frame him for stabbing her. Susan then realizes that Catherine has actually suffered a proper nervous breakdown, and she's actually she needs intervention, she needs help. And so she calls Catherine's daughter Dylan to come and visit Catherine in the hospital. And so Dylan comes to talk to her, and she's like, Mom, you've been telling me on the phone for months that you and Mike are married, and I know that's not true. You need help. Catherine then starts to recover from her breakdown, and in the space of about an episode, she's like, yeah, I'm better now. Sorry, I guess I was a mess and I lost it a bit. I've had some help, I've had some intervention. I'm good now. Susan, can we be friends? And everything just goes back to normal as if nothing happened. After that ridiculously stupid subplot is wrapped up, Susan and Mike start to have financial problems, and Mike has a lot of debt. So they decide to move out of Wisteria Lane temporarily because they really can't afford it. And they move into an apartment across town while Paul Young, who comes out of jail, rents their house on Wisteria Lane, and that's in the finale. As we know, he'd been in jail for a crime he didn't commit because he was framed by this woman called Felicia, and for seasons now he's just been gone. So I was really hoping they'd resolve that and bring him back, which they have. So they found out that basically Felicia had faked her death and that Paul had done nothing wrong. Those were Susan's storylines. As you can tell from the way I'm talking about it, I didn't like Susan's storylines at all in season 6. It was also the storylines that were weak, not just her behavior, because so much of the season was her and Catherine having this drama. And sure, the debt stuff involving Mike was interesting, but anything concerning Catherine, I was so beyond done with it. And I think Catherine is genuinely like one of the worst written characters in the entire show. Keep in mind, season 4, Catherine's a badass. Catherine's mean, cold, manipulative, and really ruthless. Then in season 5, Catherine's this sweetheart who's dating Mike and just wants to move on with her life and is treating everyone with love and kindness. She's being manipulative, but it's genuinely, I think, out of a place of just wanting to be loved. Her intentions are pure. She's just a bit of a mess, but she's very sweet. She's a real peach. And now, this season, nervous breakdown. Susan's behavior as well in this whole season was so stupid. Susan accusing Catherine of being the strangler of Julie was so dumb because Catherine does not have the strength for that, and it was just so obvious it wasn't Catherine. And then she was convinced that Danny, the teenage boy, was the strangler, so she literally tried to kill him, because she was so convinced. Susan then gets really annoyed at her lawyer friend Bob because he wants to defend the teenager. And Susan's like, you can't do that, he's the strangler, and we can't be friends anymore if you do that, which is ridiculous because he's just doing his job. And there's no proof that the teenager strangled Julie. Susan starts threatening her new neighbors, Angie and Nick, saying that their son Danny is evil and yelling it out so people on the street can hear, he's evil, he strangled my daughter. Again, she's being a drama queen. People brought her up in earlier seasons, like in season 3 and 2, they're saying, Susan, you're a drama queen, you need to work on that. She's getting that feedback. And here she is again being a drama queen. And then Susan was really upset this season because when she told people the news that her and Mike were engaged or had gotten married, she was pissed off that people's reactions were to say, oh, wait, I thought him and Catherine weren't they just together a few months ago? Like, what happened with that? What about Catherine? What does she think of this? And Susan was so annoyed that they were, I guess, taking her spotlight and bringing the attention back to Catherine. I don't know why she's annoyed about this or surprised, because if Mike is all committed with Catherine, moving in with her, and then he suddenly breaks up with her to be with you and you're married, very rushed might I add, months later, of course people are going to be confused and ask questions. And this is literally your 3rd wedding at this point, so take a chill pill. Another thing I found really weird was Susan imagines what her life would have been like if maybe she hadn't stayed with Mike and if she'd been with Carl, her first husband, and if things had worked out with him. And there's this really bizarre scene. She's gained a significant amount of weight. I don't know why this was like literally necessary to show. Who cares? Why is this here? But it's totally played for comedic relief, like her walking around, and it looks like they've edited it as well as put her in a fat suit or something, but it looks so genuinely stupid. I'm just bringing it up because it was such a randomly unnecessary scene and it was never spoken of again, so why is it there? But I need to talk about Catherine because she and Susan's storylines were so intertwined, and oh my god, I didn't like the way Susan treated her, I didn't like the way Catherine treated her. The whole thing was just so bad. Catherine was doing stuff the entire season to try and ruin the relationship, and it was the most annoying thing. I'll give you some examples just so you understand how ridiculous it was and how stupid it was. So Susan's wedding dress is delivered to Catherine's place by mistake. Then Catherine puts on Susan's wedding dress and starts cooking in it. And she's like, I think it looks better on me. Then on Susan's wedding day, she arrives and demands that Susan publicly apologizes to her at her wedding in front of everyone, which is too much to ask. Like, when you look back on your wedding day, you look back on your memories, you don't want to be thinking of the drama with Catherine. It's your special day. As if Susan is going to ruin her memories of her wedding day by making it all about Catherine and Catherine's suffering. I mean, if you want a private apology, if you come to her privately and say, I think I deserve an apology, great, fair enough, but not publicly. Susan then refuses and locks her in a closet because, I don't know, it was stupid, but I guess she was worried about Catherine, like, barging into her wedding. I wouldn't put it past Catherine at this point, seriously. But then Catherine breaks out of the closet, and while Susan and Mike are getting married, she runs down the altar and demands an apology from Susan in front of everyone. Susan then very kindly, I thought, apologizes to Catherine in front of everyone, and she says, yeah, I made a mistake, blah, blah, blah. I was selfish. I'm really sorry, Catherine. I genuinely hope we can get through this and be friends. And she goes to hug Catherine. So she did what Catherine asked. Like, she couldn't have done any better. Then Catherine whispers in her ear, like, I'm not forgiving you. I'm so angry still. So why did you want her to apologize if you were still going to be bitter about it? Seriously, she's spying through Susan and Mike's windows at night, watching them like an actual stalker with no freaking life. Eventually, Bree notices Catherine's bizarre behavior and she's like, look, I can't hire you anymore. I can't work with you anymore because I just think your behavior's really weird around Mike and Susan, and it's just strange, so I'm gonna have to let you go. And then Catherine's so angry at her that she goes and gets this sharp thing and scratches Bree's new car. So after her mental breakdown, Catherine is institutionalized for a couple of months. Catherine's whole spiral into madness and insanity was not a funny breakdown. It was, I mean, maybe for another person, sure, it could be, I guess, funny, but I never laughed. It wasn't funny. I found it weird, out of character, and sort of jarring, which I don't think was the effect they were going for. But it wasn't comedic to me at all. It was more annoying, especially because it dragged on for most of the season. I was like, holy shit, when is this going to end? This is so boring. I hated how obsessed she was with Mike. That's all that was going on with her the whole season. You could just see her ruminating, how can I get him? How can I do this? What does this mean? What does he think of me? What will he think if I do this? What did he mean when he said that? Just so in her head about it. And I was thinking, oh my God, girl, you've got a career, you've got friends who care about you, you're young, you're attractive, like, get out there, meet some new guys, respect yourself, put yourself first, choose yourself. And of course she could voice that to Mike and Susan. She could say, hey, I felt like that was really disrespectful. I deserve better than that. Like, you guys 100% could have communicated that with me. Susan, you should have come to visit me and apologize. That was really cowardly of you. That is valid. Your emotions are valid. You can express that. And I think that sometimes doing that is a good thing because it draws attention to their bad behavior, and maybe they might stop and think about it and be like, oh, you're right, actually, sorry. You know, okay, fair enough. But what she was doing wasn't that. It was just completely disempowering herself and putting Mike on a pedestal. Is this really the dynamic that you want to be creating, where you're a doormat? And if so, then why are you like continually validating that dynamic? Like, why are you doing that to yourself? And I just, oh, it was so awful and stressful. She was a strong character, and yet they destroyed her as a strong character. And her so-called friends were like useless at knowing how to help her. She got painted the entire time as well as the bad guy, the villain, the crazy ex-girlfriend. She's crazy, which was also really annoying, seeing her absolutely going insane and practically hallucinating, because it also really dismisses how bad Susan and Mike's behavior was by making out that Catherine was entirely at fault. Mike and Susan put her through a lot, and she was basically publicly rejected and not chosen, and that is an embarrassing situation to be in. And they continued to act like everything was Catherine's fault, and of course she should have been more mature about it, but at the same time it was crazy how they threw this really lavish wedding so soon after Catherine and Mike had split up. That would have really sucked. It was very like insensitive and tacky, to be honest, kind of braggy, like, oh, look at us, we're so happy, and then Catherine's been rejected. So that was sad as well for Catherine. And I don't like that before she was strong. She was no nonsense. She was literally a survivor of domestic violence. She was very powerful, and she goes from that to this pathetic weirdo who will literally go insane if a man doesn't want her. And so the whole fandom is turned against her. People hate her, and for what? In my opinion, that is character assassination. If anything should have caused a mental breakdown, it should have been having her daughter die, which happened, or being abused or being stalked by her ex-husband, not losing Mike. Is he really such a prize that losing him is such tragedy? Is he really that amazing? It pisses me off too, because Catherine saw the signs. She always had a very strong gut instinct that Susan and Mike liked each other and didn't realize. If that's the case, then it's your own fault for putting yourself in a situation where you know you're being disrespected and where your needs aren't being met and where you are the other woman, where you are literally disrespecting yourself. And then she gets angry at Susan and Mike, but it's like, you saw the signs, girl. You had an opportunity to back away and not push so hard to be with Mike, but even when you sensed that something was wrong, all it did was make you push harder for commitment rather than standing firm on your own 2 feet. I mean, Mike and Susan have been married first. Mike and Susan had a kid together. They always had a strong connection. They met first, they dated first. And if you can't accept that, then you can't be surprised when things don't work out with him. It sucks, I know, but it's true. Additionally, when Catherine returns to Wisteria Lane, she meets this girl called Robin and forms this friendship with her, and Robin ends up moving in with her. Then Robin starts developing feelings for her, and then Catherine develops feelings for her, and then everyone makes out that Catherine's gay and is calling her gay. Bisexual, I understand, but no one uses that word, which is also so weird. And this storyline just came out of nowhere. And then Catherine says to her, "Oh my God, Robin, let's go to Paris together and pursue this relationship." It was just so weird. Now, were they cute? Yes, but it was totally like bisexual erasure. I didn't like Catherine's storylines. I thought they were weird all round, and her acting was just off. She was acting so like loopy, like she was drunk all the time, and not in a funny way, just in a like, what is going on kind of way. So I was not satisfied with that at all. It was probably the worst part of season 6. I'm so glad it's over. I'm so glad we've put that to rest and put that to bed because it was bad. Now I'm going to move on and talk about the next character, which is Lynette. Lynette is definitely pregnant now. This woman has been through so much. She's had like 20 years of raising kids, too much time being a mother and thinking about other people's needs all the time and doing the washing and doing the cleaning. And as a businesswoman, it would be nice for her to be able to close that whole raising kids chapter of her life. And so I thought it was so fucked that she was then made to be pregnant with twins. So she'll have, let's say, another 18 years of raising them before they go off to university and start being more independent. It's so unfair. I hate this storyline. She is so scared about the thought of having twins so late in life when she didn't want more kids, and she's so afraid that she won't love them because she doesn't really want them. And sure, maybe she'll grow to want them, but she didn't want to be pregnant. She hides the pregnancy from her boss, Carlos, so that she makes sure that her promotion doesn't get jeopardized because she wants to be focusing on her career at the moment, not being pregnant. Gabrielle later discovers the truth and she's annoyed at Lynette. She's like, you should have told Carlos what was going on. You can't lie about something like that. Following a plane crash that happens, Lynette realizes that something is wrong with one of the twins, and she discovers that one of the twins needs circulatory surgery. And then when she wakes up, Tom tells her that the sick baby died, but the other baby is okay. Lynette is really upset about this lost baby. She's really traumatized over it. And later on, her son Preston returns from his trip to Europe with this Russian woman named Irina, and Lynette has this assumption that Irina is a gold digger or has this hidden agenda when it comes to Preston, which to me seems like a huge stereotype about like Russian women. But she thinks this woman's way too hot to be with Preston because Irina's like, I want to get engaged, and she's like, why? You guys are so young. She investigates and finds out that indeed Irina is a gold digger and a prostitute, but then before anything can actually happen, Irina is killed by the Fairview Strangler. Lynette ends up inviting this very troubled teenage boy called Eddie to come and live with her and her family for a bit, but he has these like emotional issues, which I totally think is Lynette's compassionate side, because you can see that she has empathy for this kid and like wants to be maternal towards him. And I thought Lynette was just such a sweet heart with that. And in general, in season 6, I really liked Lynette. There were 100% issues there with Lynette's storylines. First of all, the whole pregnancy thing, A, it makes me feel sick because she didn't want it, and B, the word abortion was never actually uttered, which I thought was interesting, and they totally skim around the whole topic. They keep it very ambiguous, like, what if I don't want to have this baby? What if I can't do this? When Lynette decides to keep the baby, her boobs get really big because of her pregnancy, and it's the first sign that she is pregnant visibly. Carlos and his male co-worker are both sexualizing her for some reason, which is odd because I thought Carlos was past his whole like misogynistic douchey behavior from season 1 for the most part, but then he started behaving like that and I was reminded again of how he used to be. Then Then Carlos says that Gabby should have gotten a breast enhancement as well because hers are a bit small, which I thought was such a bizarre and out of character thing for him to say, because the whole series he is always going on and on and on about how obsessed he is with her and how he can't get his hands off her and how she's so hot. And now he's like, yeah, you know what, her boobs actually aren't great. And the weird thing about Carlos sexualizing Lynette is because last season she fell over in the shower when she was naked, obviously because she was showering, and he came in to save her and drag her out of the shower, and he honestly was very gentlemanly, very gracious. He didn't make a big deal out of it. He didn't really, I mean, he said that she had nothing to be ashamed of. If he wanted an opportunity to sexualize her and go on and on and on about her boobs or something, that was the time. Another thing I had a huge issue with is, as much as I liked Lynette for the most part this season, aside from a few hiccups and a few controlling things she did, she was actually really nice overall, but I didn't like how Tom treated her with the whole pregnancy situation, because he just seemed so lacking in compassion around why she would feel weird around having more kids, and he was basically forcing her into going through with it. He was saying, you'll learn to love them, I promise. And again, it's like telling her what to do with her body, and it's actually so much more than her body. I mean, of course, it's that she doesn't want to go through another pregnancy, but it's more the fact that she's bringing these kids into the world and she doesn't want to be a bad mom. She wants to give them a good life they deserve, but if she's not really present and not committed to that, she's not going to be there for them in the way that she should. And he's always done this. He always blames her for not wanting more kids. He has since the beginning of the show. And again, there's this undercurrent throughout the whole show of him not feeling manly enough, not feeling good enough, not talented enough or smart enough, not a provider or lost in his life, not a man. And then he blames it on Lynette. It's your fault I'm like this. You don't understand me. You don't listen to me. It's got nothing to do with her at all. The next character I want to talk about is Gabby. She's getting very controlling of Anna, which I thought was such a stupid subplot, because she's like, you can't do this, you can't do that. You want to go out to a club? How dare you? I'll follow you there and I'll publicly humiliate you in front of everyone and bring you home, and nah, so naggy. And I was like, oh, for God's sake, Gabby. First of all, she's not your kid. Second of all, she's old enough now that she's formed, and so if she's messed up, unfortunately, that's kind of how she is. You didn't get the opportunity to change her and raise her, and that's not how she's used to being. And I just don't understand why Gabby couldn't just chill and then wait till she was old enough to move out and let her live her life, because she's not actually Gabby's daughter. And Gabby kept behaving so much like her mum at points and just really smothering, and I don't see the point. I mean, Anna was so like manipulative. To me, she seemed pretty set in her ways, and I think if she did choose to change, it would need to be a decision that she made and not something that was forced on her or nagged on her. Then we have John, that gardener from the beginning of the show, coming back again into Gabby's life like a worm, trying to get her to love him. He's like a little wart the show can't get rid of. And then he thinks if he starts like flirting with Anna and stuff, that maybe Gabby will be jealous or something. And Gabby's like, no, you know what, I'm really happy with Carlos now. That's the end of an era. That's a closed chapter in the book of my life. I don't want you in my life. Go away. I swear, John Rowland is the worst written character in the show. All he does is try and grovel to get Gabby to love him. Like, I mean, it's funny and everything. He's literally crying on the floor about how much he loves her. He has no clear motives, no purpose, no life outside of Gabby. He just wanders back onto the show when it's deemed appropriate to declare his love for her. Gabby's also making these really weird comments about her kids, sometimes saying, God, they're a nightmare, or don't remind me why I had kids. And it always makes me feel like, why did you have kids then? Because sometimes she is really considerate towards her daughters, and she puts on little fashion shows for them and bonds with them, or makes their Halloween costumes for them and genuinely behaves like a mother. But then at other times she's like, God, I miss being single. Or when her neighbors invite her around and when she's sick and they just spend time with her and she doesn't need to look after her kids for once, she puts off going back to her kids and husband for as long as possible, because she's like, I can finally get a break because my kids are so annoying. Does she want them or not? Why did she have them? The next housewife, Bree, I want to discuss, because Bree's storylines in season 6 were okay, but they definitely weren't the best. Like, she's definitely had stronger seasons. Brie is having this relationship with Carl, and even though he's sort of in playboy douchebag energy, he's also starting to say that he loves her and wants to propose to her and all this, even though she's still married to Orson technically, but she's not even bothering to try and make it work with Orson. She just gave up on the whole thing, which I get, but also it's kind of sad. And I never expected her and Carl to be a pairing. She feels like she connects intellectually and emotionally with Orson, but connects sexually a lot with Carl, and so it makes her feel conflicted. Eventually Susan finds out about her and Carl and does give them her blessing, even though at first she's really shocked, obviously. But then when the plane crashes onto Wisteria Lane, Carl is killed, which was jumping the shark a little bit, I thought, a bit ridiculous. Orson starts going down this spiral of being really depressed. He gets paralyzed after that plane crash, so he's in a wheelchair, which felt a bit repetitive because it reminded me of the Carlos going blind storyline earlier. But anyway, Brie feels terrible because she sees how down he is, and it makes her realize that maybe she needs to reconcile with him and make an effort, which was a little tacky to me because I can guarantee she would not have done that if Carl was still alive. But then this young man named Sam visits Brie, and he wants to be her new assistant, and he's saying he's really capable and he's really invested, but then he reveals that he's actually her ex-husband Rex's son that she didn't know about, and he like wants to reconnect with her or something, which was very weird to me because they're not biologically related, so why would he care about Brie? But he was trying really hard to be included in the family and stuff, and for quite a few episodes it seems that he has some kind of ulterior motive, maybe around trying to get the money from her business or inheritance money or something like that. He then tries blackmailing Brie when she doesn't go along with what he wants, and then he threatens to blackmail her unless she turns the control of her company over to him, and he gets super nasty. And he says, I'm going to tell the police about Andrew killing that woman in a hit and run, and Brie's like, okay, fine. And then Orson finds out what Andrew did, which was killing someone in a hit and run, and Orson had never known about this. And then he gets really angry at Brie, and he's like, oh my god, you were so hypocritical. I respected you as a woman for having standards and for sending me to jail for trying to hit Mike with my car, but now I found out that years ago you covered up a hit and run that your son committed, so he never needed to take accountability for it. So you're choosing him and protecting him, but you punished me and made me go to jail. So like, what's up with that double standard? Why is that? And then Brie was like, well, this is different because when Andrew committed his hit and run, he was a teenager and you were a grown adult and you did it on purpose and stuff. And he was like, nah, he's an adult now, he should face consequences now. So I feel like your moral rules are really all over the place, I'm not happy with this. And then he actually leaves her for good. Brie then realizes that maybe Orson was right, and she does have this weird hypocrisy around things like this. So yeah, those were Brie's main storylines. Overall, Brie was okay in season 6, but honestly, I didn't love her. I felt like she was very much wrapped up in her own petty struggles and stuff. She reminded me a bit of Catherine, like just being very self-absorbed and focused on her own woe, and so she was never looking at the bigger picture. Her dating Carl was a red flag because he's Susan's ex-husband, and I just thought that was a little odd. And she was then trying to organize this secret relationship with Carl, and when Susan's daughter Julie was lying in the hospital after being strangled, rather than feeling bad for Susan and Julie, all Brie was thinking about was, oh my gosh, when will I tell her about Carl and me? Will Susan be angry? Which just felt a little bit out of touch considering Susan had bigger things to worry about, like her daughter being in the hospital. And she goes to such lengths to try and cover up what she was doing with Carl, hoping no one will find out she's a cheater. And so yeah, that was what happened in season 6 with all the different characters. It was pretty juicy and interesting, even though there were some issues there. I just want to point out though, I haven't mentioned it before actually, but there's still this undercurrent of fat shaming and stuff in the show that's happening quite a lot. The way Susan treats Gabby's daughter is odd, and it seems rooted in some sort of dislike for the way that Gabby's daughter looks, which I don't get why Susan's bothered by that because it's got nothing to do with her. But Susan had pushed Gabby's daughter once, and to be fair, like Gabby's daughter was being a bully and she'd pushed MJ, but I don't think that Susan physically pushing Gabby's child was necessary. Like she's a bigger adult, like, it's just not needed. You could just tell her off verbally and then get Gabby to discipline her maybe. And she's also always making comments about Gabby's daughter's weight. why? And then she framed her and made sure that Juanita got detention just because she was beating Susan's son MJ in candy sales. And I guess that triggered Susan or something because she wants her son to feel like a winner. She kept her at school and punished her so MJ could win the competition and was making her like scrub the floor on her hands and knees. And it was odd because Gabby, of course, was being competitive with the candy sales. She wanted to win, but she wasn't like taking it out on MJ, whereas Susan was taking out her frustration on Gabby's kid. So yeah, I've noticed that, and I also noticed that imaginary scene in the future or the past, whatever that was, of Susan being a lot more overweight and her imagining it, and then it being made into this joke like, oh my god, look how fat she is. What? It's very weird. I'm going to be back soon with an overall review where I go in depth into the later seasons of the show, specifically seasons 7 and 8, which I haven't talked about yet. So make sure if you want to see that you give this video a thumbs up and follow me on Instagram. I will see you guys for the next video. Mwah.